Good evening. The board meeting will come to order at 5 p.m. Good evening and thank you for attending the Albuquerque Civilian Police Oversight Advisory Board on August 13th of 2026. Ms. Baca, can I please get a member roll call?
Chair Calderon.
Present.
Vice Chair Budonato.
Present.
Member Bolianes.
Present.
Member Duncan.
Present.
Member Radfield.
Present.
Mr. Chair, you do have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. With that being said, the next order of business will be the Pledge of Allegiance. All rise, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next order of business will be approval of the agenda. Are there any changes board members would like to propose? Good. So I do want to make a change. I'm going to bring, give me 1 second. I want to bring our appeals up above our use of force cases. So right after public comment will be appeals. With that being said, I make a motion that we move appeals to above the use of force cases. May I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Member Bolianes. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote?
Chair Calderon.
Approve.
Vice Chair Budonato.
Approve.
Member Bolianes.
Approved.
Member Duncan.
Approved.
Member Reichfeld.
Approved.
Mr. Chairman, motion passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. So with that being said, I make a second motion that we approve the agenda as amended. May I get a second?
Second that.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote for the approval of the agenda as amended?
Chair Calderon.
Approve.
Vice Chair Budonato.
Approve.
Member Bolianes.
Approved.
Member Duncan.
Approved.
Member Reichfeld.
Approved.
Mr. Chairman, that motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. With that being said, we'll move on to the next order of business, which will be the review and approval of minutes from July 9th of 2026. Do any board members have any changes to the minutes from last month? No, sir. Yeah. Anybody from the agency? Good. With that being said, I make a motion that we approve the minutes from July 9th of 2026 as written. May I get a second, please? Seconded. Thank you, Member Bolianes. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote for the minutes from July 9th of 2026?
Chair Calderon.
Approve.
Vice Chair Budonato.
Approved.
Member Bolianes.
Approved.
Member Duncan.
Approved.
Member Reichfeld.
Approved.
Mr. Chairman, that motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. With that being said, we'll move on to the next order of business, which will be reports from city departments. Up first will be APD, Internal Affairs Professional Standards Division, Acting Commander Matthew Kaplan.
Good afternoon. Members of the board, for the record, I am Acting Commander Matthew Kaplan for Internal Affairs Professional Standards, and this is the reporting period for July 2026. I'm sure all of you have the monthly report with you. This report reflects preliminary departmental data as of August 11th, so the numbers may be subject to change later on depending on what happens from here forward. During the month of July, IAPS opened 28 new misconduct investigations. This figure includes investigations opened by IAPS and those subsequently handled by or through the area commands. During that same period, 62 investigations were completed, demonstrating that we continue to close significantly more cases than we opened during the month. Of those investigations, 11 cases were opened by IAPS and referred to the area commands, while the area commands completed 28 of those investigations in July. At the end of the reporting period, there were 68 investigations pending completion. One of the more positive indicators for July is the average time to completions. The average investigation completed during the month took 78 days. This places IAPS below the department's 90-day investigative completion goal and reflects continued progress in moving cases through the investigative process. In addition to misconduct investigations, IAPS and the area commands initiated 24 enhanced supervisory interventions, or ESIs, during July, and 35 ESIs were completed. Overall, the July numbers demonstrate continued investigative productivity, with 62 investigations completed compared to the 28 open, while maintaining an average completion time of 78 days. If you turn to page 3 of that report, 40 of the 62 completed investigations resulted in sustained findings, which represents about 66% of those investigations. In terms of the reoccurring areas where we're seeing the largest numbers of allegations, that continues to be 1-1, or our personal code of conduct. That represented 24 completed investigations with 12 sustained, so about half of those were sustained. The second most common was 2-76, which is our court. 17 completed investigations, and 12 of those were sustained. Third is 2-10, which represents our emergency communications center. 6 completed investigations, and all 6 were sustained allegations. If there are any questions, those represent our monthly stats for July.
Thank you, sir. Board members, do you have any questions?
No.
No questions, sir. I
Thank you.
appreciate that. Thank you. With that being said, we'll move on to next presenter, which will be Internal Affairs Force Division, Acting Commander Troy Nico.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, distinguished board members. Again, Acting Commander Troy Nico with the Internal Affairs Force Division. I know you have all been provided with a copy of our force stats for July. Just wanted to highlight some points as I do every month. This month in particular, we had 20 use of force, and serious use of force was actually down from June, which is something that is kind of unusual. Usually our numbers continue to climb during the summer, but it actually fell this month. Went from 25 down to 20. Of those, 13 were the use of force and 7 were the serious uses of force. As far as force types, the second month in a row, our highest was ECW, or the tasers, followed by empty hand takedowns. We also in July had our 7th officer involved shooting. We also just recently had our 8th officer involved shooting, so we've had 8 as of this year thus far. As far as shows of force, it went up from 26 to 28. Our highest show of force was with firearms. Again, this is pretty consistent throughout the year, and we're not seeing any kind of anomalies or anything with that. As far as low-level control, if you remember, I talked about low-level control not being force last month, but it's still something that we keep an eye on. Also, I do know that it's probably going to be discussed later on during the meeting. The auditing process that was with my division has now been moved to the performance metric unit. And so it is still being audited, it's just not under my division. But it's important to notice that that continues to go down as far as our low-level control. And I think that has to do with reporting and appropriate or accurate reporting, where officers are required to check the low-level control box and then describe what that was. And I think there was some misunderstanding amongst the officers when that should be checked and when it shouldn't. So I sent an email out approximately 2 months ago, and we're now seeing those numbers come into alignment where we expect them to be, which is about 134. Okay. And then last month we had 23 completed investigations. All were in policy. So last month we had no out of policy uses of force. And I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, sir. Board members, any questions? Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Moving on to next item would be APD's Academy. So Lieutenant Sean Higgin.
Hi, good evening.
Hey, sir.
I'm Lieutenant Sean Higdon. I'm representing the Albuquerque Police Academy. Last month, you had asked for some numbers in regards to, I guess, cadets who have graduated versus officers who have left the department. I received some numbers this morning. The numbers are from January 1st through today's date. As of January 1st through today, we have graduated 41 cadets. There's been 37 officers that have left the department, whether it be to retirement, resignation, or termination. Things going on at the academy is about 3 weeks ago, and I think it was brought up in the last meeting. We graduated our recruit officer basic training class number 4. There was 18 cadets who graduated from that class. They're all on their first phase of on-the-job training at the moment. So from what I understand, they're all doing relatively well. We have 10 cadets that are in their 18th week of 28 weeks of training. They started off with, I believe, 17, and they're down to 10 at the moment. And then beginning of this week, we started it's a pre-academy. In the past, the pre-academy was a 3-week class. We've streamlined that down to ultimately a 4-day class with the I guess the onboarding of them that they go through with the city to get their employee numbers and everything. We will wrap up with them tomorrow. We have 19 cadets that will start day 1 of training next Monday for 28 weeks of training. Their estimated graduation date for our next class that starts Monday is going to be February of next year, so late February. Ultimately, also going on at the academy is we're running in-person training for our sworn officers. We have in-person training going on right now for handling persons with mental impairment. Wrapped up with that is also application of tourniquet that is required by the state. So officers are receiving training that will actually be finished. Our entire department will be trained with that by the end of September. We have ongoing reality-based training going on that's been happening now since probably early July. That's going to go through November based on manning through that unit. Their days, they're not able to work 5 days a week, so they're working 2 to 3 days a week, getting the whole department through based on the scenarios that they run and stuff like that. It does take a while. So that will be going through November. Our firearms qualifications will be starting in September. That will also be going through November. And we have ongoing online training that not only NMDPS, the state of New Mexico, offers, but also online training that we put out to officers in order to keep their certifications. Can I stand for any questions?
Thanks, sir.
I've got one quick question. How many of the upcoming class consists of PSAs?
So
if
the
any?
class of 19 that starts on Monday, there's 2 police service aides, and then there's 2 prisoner transport unit officers. And in regards to PSAs, because I know we're always talking about PSAs here, but we are going to run an 8-week PSA class. It begins on September 22nd. I've been talking to Ms. McDermott about it. Previously, we had been sending them to CNM for their training. We've cut ties with CNM, so we're going to do it all in-house. We're in the process of taking what curriculum they had and rebuilding it into our own to make an 8-week training course, and I plan on providing that to you guys as soon as it's all made. And compare that to what CNM was providing.
Lieutenant Higgins, question on the churn, right? At the end of the year, are we going to be still kind of growing? Are we still constantly growing the number of officers we're training to ensure that we're, the churn, retirement, people leaving, we're still growing the police force, right? Because I think that was some of the concern back in the day was we got lower numbers and we're trying to regrow the force. Are we still kind of being net positive by X percent, and is that a goal of yours?
The recruiting numbers that we're seeing right
Recruiting
now,
and going from candidates to sworn officers are outpacing officers leaving or retiring.
well, I mean, looking at the numbers I have for the year, we're looking about average at the moment. However, looking at the recruiting numbers that we're bringing in, we just started a new website. We're actually still trying to get it, all the kinks ironed out. Once this new website works out, we're gonna have like pie charts that show us all this information real time. With what I was looking at this morning, as we're still trying to get some, like I said, kinks worked out from what our background investigators were using compared to what this program can do. If we're all familiar with our officers switching from one report writing system to another, it tends to create chaos in a sense. So next week, myself and the recruiting sergeant are going to be working with our background investigators to ensure we can get this off and running. And I promised the deputy chief that we're going to have this 100% by Tuesday. But at the moment, there's 92 applicants in the system that have put in an interest card. So it doesn't mean they're in the process to become a cadet. They have to do the entire process. So I feel like 92 is a good number for a website that started on it was July 1st. So our old website is, all that information is separate. So you bet.
Board members, any other questions? Awesome. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Moving on to the next agenda item will be from ACS, from Jeffrey Bustamante, the Deputy Director for ACS. I don't believe he's here today. He's not here. No. CPOA, nothing from him either? Okay, that's fine. So not present. So moving on to City Attorney, so Ms. Lindsay Rosenborough from Managing Attorney. Get your ass out of here.
Good evening, board members. I have one update for you this evening. The City Attorney's Office has started a new program in Metro Court in coordination with Metro Court, the Public Defender's Office, and the District Attorney's Office. It's called the CABQ Friday Arraignment Program. This is a program to assist in the handling of some of the citations that are being filed by APD officers for certain city ordinance violations. So these are getting scheduled on a special docket just for these citations. Our office is handling the prosecution of these. And what we're doing is providing a space for service providers to be available in the courtroom. And many folks are showing up and they're getting routed to services, making appointments with services. And thus far, for folks who have been showing up, their cases have been dismissed in exchange for showing up and signing up with services. And so this is an opportunity to connect folks who might otherwise not have access to certain resources. So we've been working on implementing that program. It's in the early stages. But so far, we have already seen an increase in people showing up. We have about, I think, 140, 150 cases scheduled for tomorrow. So we expect to see a lot of people. Last week, we had 30 people show up, and that was a pretty good showing. So we hope that it continues to grow and the success continue to grow. So I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Madam. Any questions? Any questions? No questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next agenda item will be from City Council Services, so Chris Sylvan.
Thank you, Chair. Board, Chris Sylvan, Albuquerque City Council, Council Services. Just two quick updates. The first update is that at the August 3rd City Council meeting, the CPOA's 2025 July through December semi-annual report was heard. It was on the consent agenda and no counselors had any questions, so it went through and it was approved. And the second update that I have is training is rescheduled for board member who didn't attend the last training, so we got that scheduled. So Charm School is up, and that's my agenda. And also, you're welcome to attend. I think the director and the deputy director do have the calendar invite. So I'm told that it's different this time, the scenario, so you might give it a try if you're available. The date is 1 week from next Tuesday. And that's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Board members, any questions? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. With that being said, we'll move on to CPOA. So,
CPC.
sorry, CPC, my apologies. My check mark was too close. So Community Policing Councils, by Mr. Kelly Mensa, Community Engagement Manager.
Good evening, city employees, honorable board, and members of the public, and also officers. We had a pretty good month this month in the Community Policing Council. We started a new series with APD that we think we're going to do in all the councils, if that's possible. We brought in Sergeant Rachel Nakamura from the Auto Theft Unit, and she talked about how to keep your car from getting stolen, how they operate the program, about bait cars, and about their methods of following and, whether they can lock the car or not when the suspect is in the car, and et cetera. There was a lot of good information on that one. And she's done 2 of those now, and she said she's going to inform the whole city at some point. We started we have a couple of new guests for the next month or so, and one is Director of Public Safety, Raul Buhanda. He was supposed to do the Foothills meeting on Monday. He ended up canceling, he had something else to do. Hopefully he can redo that. He has pledged to do 2 meetings this month. That's going to be next Thursday and the Thursday after that in the Southeast and the Valley. And we have some good questions already about whether this is going to be a chief position, about how he feels he's going to unify the 3 agencies, which are ACS, AFD, and APD, into one unified mission for public safety, and how his background with the FBI, he was special agent in charge of the FBI locally and in El Paso as well, and how that's going to work with the experience he had moving it forward to the city. And on Tuesday, we started speaking to the Metro Court judges again. We had Chief Judge Joshua Sanchez and a couple of other people talking about magistrate judges around the state, which are attorneys, judges who are not attorneys, and also municipal court judges here, the difference when cases are transferred to district court and when they stay here. And we have a lot of information on specialty courts, which was the focus. We've got about 12 specialty courts now. We've got courts for veterans, courts for Native Americans, courts for not juveniles, but there are a lot of things, DWI court, and a lot of things in which we have repeating problems around the city, and we're trying not to send everyone to an incarceration situation. So here it is, you come to a specialty court, you do some work, you write some reports, you listen to some speakers, and you commit to about 2 to 3 months of just learning and trying to do better. And then they say they've got about a 10% recidivism rate of suspects who go through specialty courts. So it's a really good program, and how these are funded and how they work. Next month, we are scheduled to have Chief Barker and also Deputy Chief Langwood attend all 6 councils and do a State of the City law enforcement address. We do this twice a year. The chief is committed to 2 meetings this year, did the first one in March. And in the month after that, we are committed to have Warden Smith come and tell us what the numbers are and what the changes are in the 6 months we have not talked to him. Additionally, there are some protests going on with employees at the jail right now. We'll find out what that's all about. And he has changed a lot of things since he started. For instance, put tablets in place of the library. So we're going to see how these programs are working. Also, he has some new drug programs going on. We had National Night Out a couple of weeks ago. There were well over 70 neighborhood associations which had parties and meetings and get-togethers around the city. We actually got a few people interested. We had a couple show up at the Foothills and at the Northeast who attended National Night Out parties thrown by our members and decided to come and take a look. So that's a good deal. I attended a VIN etching event over a couple of weeks ago, and what VIN etching is when APD decides to put your VIN number on all your windows, so in case your car is stolen. They're going to look at this, they're going to see it and realize they have to replace all the windows to sell the car, which is probably, hopefully, not cost or time effective to a car thief. So we're looking to get this program around in the city. I passed out information on the council at this event, and it seemed like we had 40 to 50 cars that day, so it was worthwhile. We've got 2 new members of the council, and we've had 3 applications since our last meeting. And it looks at this point like our year-end dinner will be held on Saturday, November 21st. So hopefully a couple of you can attend. And that's my report for the month. I stand for questions.
Thank you, sir. Board members, any questions?
No, sir.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your
All right.
time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so now moving on to CPUA, presented by Executive Director Diane McDermott.
Thank you, Chair and Board. So for the month of August, well, the August report is that we received 75 complaint intakes from July 1 to July 31. 25 of those were assigned for investigation, either between the CPOA or those appropriately already sent to IA. 28 driving complaints were resolved for with the supervisors. 20 were essentially miscellaneous, where either we received insufficient information, it was determined that APD was not involved, or we were able to resolve the citizen's concern due to just seeking information. 2 were submitted to the field, which we basically consider as informal mediation. Unfortunately, we received 0 commendations, which is unusual. We usually at least receive a couple, but we did not get any in July. Our new complaint form is live on the website and went through the PPRB process for APD to update their web-based form. Our brochures are still pending, but so we should still start seeing some new data as that new form is being used. It's already being used, but so we'll be interested to see how that changes a little bit. The board's, as was already mentioned by Mr. Sullivan, the board's semi-annual report has already been passed and approved by council. We've put it up on the website, so it is up available for the public to review. The board's semi-annual audit of the CPOA cases involving force allegations is also now published on the CPO website, again, for public review. The board participated in the new use of force policy training on July 29th. The resources have been shared with the board for further and continued review. All of our investigative staff have also gone through this training so that we're hopefully equipped to take on any of the complaints that may be coming through that are not being investigated by IFD just due to the various changes in the policy. As already was mentioned, the required professionalism training or charm school has a new session. It is August 25th from 10 to 12. Is entitled Emotional Intelligence. It is, as he already said, it's a different session is our understanding. So if more board members can attend, please just let the office know so that we can make sure that we post a notice of quorum if there is going to be more than the quorum amount. So just let us know if you're going to go. And then we have posted mediation guidelines on our website, which is basically just reinforcing the practice that we were already following, but now it's just available for more review. And that's it. I stand for any questions.
Sweet. Board members, any questions? Awesome. Thank you, ma'am. I gotta write my notes. Give me 2 seconds. Okay. Perfect. With that being said, we'll move on to the next order of business, which will be public comment. There was no written comments online. Is there any in person? No. Is the form back there? I signed up for public comment. Okay. Perfect. Hi. So give us 1 quick second to get set up, okay? So give me 1
I'm
second.
sorry, say that again?
Give me 1 second to set up, okay?
Okay.
We had to put a timer up and all the fun stuff.
Oh, okay,
And
got
make
it.
sure you're prepared and everything, so. It's on Zoom. That's what we'll see. Worst case, we do it the old-fashioned way, so give me a second.
Mr. Chairman, we do have public comment, and her name is Laura Adelete.
Alderete, correct?
Adelete.
Awesome. You guys ready with the timer?
Yep.
Right? Cool. Awesome. So with that being said, you have 3 minutes, okay, Laura?
Okay,
And then you'll hear the timer go off, and then we'll stop you. And if you're pretty close to the end, I'll give you some more time, okay?
thank
So
you.
with that being said, the time is yours, okay?
Thank you. Jose Armas was experiencing a mental breakdown on May 26th of this year. By all accounts, he was done with his life. It wasn't the first time he had expressed this, but it certainly would be his last. APD released some video footage showing their bravery, their tactical training, and of course their ability to aim and succeed in lethal shooting. However, we have a lot of footage that neighbors took which shows what appears to be a police training exercise. There were a lot of confused cops not understanding what to do. There were cops yelling that he was upstairs when the video clearly shows him downstairs at the front door. There was no coverage of the back of the building, and there were a lot of eyes on all these cops that day. The scene was not secured simply by pushing the family members 2 blocks away from that house. Let me pose a few questions to you, board members. Why were there so many cops at the scene? There were rookie cops running around claiming that they were fearing for their safety. There was SWAT and there was an FBI officer. We later learned through media that all of the personnel was dispatched to that scene that night, and there was no police available to respond to a DUI call from a PSA that night. Why was APD so quick to kill Jose Armas, a 23-year-old? Why was ACS not called? Not one of the officers handled the call, and they're supposed to be working hand in hand with the police. There needs to be a way that officers can be trained to shoot with the intention to protect themselves and to protect the public without having to kill people. All lives matter. Jose's life mattered. We all deserve to go home at the end of the day. While APD claims they used their de-escalation tactics, why did it fail so miserably? Perhaps showing up in full force with all available cops on duty at the scene, with SWAT, FBI. Perhaps it's the fact that one person sheltered in place in a private home having suicidal tendencies had to look out the window to see cops manhandling his baby brother, shoving his old grandfather, who's 80 years old and was recovering from heart surgery, open heart surgery. Seeing cops yank his mother off the premises by yanking her arm and yelling at his stepfather and his friends who were also there to help him to back off. Or maybe their de-escalation tactics didn't work because he looked out the window and saw a bunch of guns and a bunch of rifles pointing at him. And the worst part is him having to hear cops saying, "I have lethal." Do you think maybe these are the reasons that the de-escalation tactics failed and took the life of my nephew?
You can continue.
Thank you so much. Again, why didn't ACS show up? It's the public's understanding that they are paid to show up and work these type of police-involved activities. Instead, all I see is that ACS is scheduling movies that the community can come watch. Why didn't the APD officer that was on site at that scene use his radio to call ACS to appear? Most importantly, why didn't they allow his mother to help? She was right there. They could hear her trying to talk to her son, and they did not allow her to get close. They threatened her. There needs to be accountability. There needs to be training so that officers don't feel that lethal is their only option. APD immediately starts to justify this killing by saying, "Oh, there were shots fired from the second floor," but the video clearly shows he was on the front doorstep. And we also know that he was on the first floor, bleeding out, where he died. We also know that the gun that he had was a faulty gun that could only fire once before it dismantled. So there was no way there was rapid fire shots coming from the second floor of that unit. If APD and ACS would have done their jobs as we pay them to do, I would not have to live with my nephew's haunting last words. "I'm dead. I'm dead. I'm dead." Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. My condolences to your family for the loss.
That is all that's on the list of the public comments, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Laura, just, because I know you have your family here as well. We don't respond to public comments necessarily, and especially because the case is so. No worries. We don't respond to public comments in dialogue way, so thanks for the message. It is a fresh case technically, so I know APD is doing their investigation on it. Eventually it will come to us for review as well.
Correct.
So you will see that case come across our docket eventually as a use of force case. And at that point as well, you'll have a hearing like we're going to do here for the next appeals that you hear after your public comment. And so that same process will happen as well. So there'll be additional reviews on top of that. So thank you for your
Thank you
words.
for allowing me the time to speak. I wanted to come earlier, but as you can imagine, we have been grieving as a family. There are other complaints that I will be submitting, and I will come back to present those to you because I think it's only fair that we get heard.
And I totally agree, and that's the whole process of it, is
Yes.
to be heard, right? That's the starting
Correct.
baseline of it, right, is to start that dialogue. With that being said, your notes that you wrote down, would you be able to get a copy of that?
I would gladly submit copies. Just let me know who I sent them to.
Do you want to give us that hard copy, or do you want to send us an email?
I can email them to you because
Okay.
I kind of scribbled a little bit on
No,
this.
no
one.
worries. On our website is our public email address.
Okay,
On that one, if you just send it to that, and then it will go to my team here, and then they'll get it to us as well. And it'll go
absolutely.
in the notes as well, right, for the
Okay.
minutes. And the reason why is just, I think it's important that we have that as well.
I just wanted to also let you know that his mom is here, my sister, my oldest sister, my little sister. And like I said, we have been grieving this horrible loss of my 23-year-old nephew. It was very sudden, very tragic, and we're still trying to let it all sink in. But we can't stand by and, have APD do these press conferences and just send out, edited video. We have a lot of video that a lot of the neighbors took. I have probably gone through about 6 hours of video. So at any point, if that's something you guys would like to review, I would gladly send that to you as well. But it's not fair for us just to sit and have APD say all these things and not tell the truth and not let us speak either. So that's why we're here. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And Deputy Director? Sorry, Executive Director. So sorry.
I would just add for whatever family, whatever evidence, to, please get with the Internal Affairs Force Division and make sure that they have that benefit of that information. Usually when IFD does an investigation, they do a canvas, they look for videos, they look for everything, but if for some reason that information hasn't already been shared, I would just encourage the family to make sure that, they have the benefit of all the information so they can do a proper investigation.
Thank you, Executive Director. And Laura, do you have that contact ready? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Okay, and of course. So with that being said, we will move on to the next order of business, which will be our appeals. Our first appeal today is going to be for CPC 185-25. Let me load my documentation up real quick. Mr. Garrett Osborne? Okay, awesome. Give us one quick second, sir. You can sit right here in the front couple seats if you want, just because our council has to read a whole spiel of stuff real quick that all of us have to listen to real quick, and then we'll call you up after that, okay? So, awesome. Council, you ready?
I
Read your
am.
whole spiel? Okay. Time is yours.
Good evening, Chair and Board. We are now at the appeals portion of the agenda, and the following process will be followed in each of the appeals. During the appeal hearing, each interested party has an opportunity to be heard and to present arguments stating their position. No new evidence will be permitted to be introduced during the appeal hearing. The hearings today are quasi-judicial hearings, and the decisions will be made by the members of this board. The scope of these appeals will be limited to the complaint and their respective findings of the investigation that followed. If the parties during their presentation go outside of this scope, they may be directed by the chair that only arguments The only arguments that will be considered by the board are those relating to the complaint and the subsequent investigation. We are recording this meeting tonight so that a complete, clear record can be created of everything that is said. However, please remember that we cannot create an accurate record with people talking over one another. If people start to talk over one another, the chair may call for order so that there can be a clear record of the hearing. The following time limits will apply to this hearing. 15 minutes for the complainant who requested the appeal or their representatives. The complainant may call witnesses, but this will count against their overall time. 10 minutes will be given to the CPOA director or her designee. 5 minutes will be provided for the police officer if he or she is present. APD will be afforded 10 minutes, and there will be an additional 5 minutes for the complainant or their representative to provide a short rebuttal to anything that has been presented by the other parties. Ultimately, the burden of proof is on the complainant bringing the appeal to demonstrate, 1, that a policy was misapplied in the evaluation of the complaint, or 2, that the findings or recommendations of the director were arbitrary, capricious, or constituted an abuse of discretion, or 3, that the findings and recommendations of the director were not consistent with the record evidence. These are the only basis upon which the board may modify or change the findings or recommendations of the director. At the end of each party's presentation, the board will be given an opportunity to ask questions. These questions do not count against that respective party's presentation time. The questions should be focused on clarifying the record or argument given and should not offer or invite new information or evidence from a board member through asking the question. The parties are reminded to remain respectful and professional during their presentations. Any disruption of another party's presentation will not and shall not be tolerated. At the close of the hearing, the board will deliberate. The board may make a determination in open session or decide to deliberate in closed session as allowed by the New Mexico Open Meetings Act. All final decisions by the board will be made in public. Once a decision is made, a final written notice of decision will be provided to all interested parties as provided in the applicable ordinance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Council. Mr. Osborne, do you mind coming up to the podium over here? Thank you for joining us, sir. So to just recap real quick. So you'll have 15 minutes for your initial, and then as well, if you can avoid using officer's name as much as possible and just use the plural version of officers. And from there, yeah, we'll continue. So sir, the time is yours.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Garrett Osborne. I'm appealing the findings. I'm going to focus on specific APD policies and objective evidence contained in APD's own body-worn camera recordings, reports, CAD records, property records, and sworn search warrant affidavit. For each issue, I will identify the applicable rule, the evidence, the conflict I believe was not adequately resolved, why it mattered, and what I am asking the board to do. I'm not asking the board to take my word over the officers. I'm asking the board to compare APD's own evidence and APD's own records and policies. APD's policies govern reports, supervisor review, personnel conduct, and discipline require integrity in official police business and provide the investigation of potential lack of truthfulness. The issues involving Sergeant M, Officer D, and Detective O. The body-worn camera recording establishes a sequence that can independently be verified. B, discovered a partial blue pill under a mat in the bedroom while Sergeant M was present. M then went outside and contacted Officer D. D subsequently arrested me outside. After my arrest, Officer L entered the bedroom with M. He raised up this mat and asked Sergeant M if they had verified it. She answered, "Did I verify what? Did I verify? No. L then used a pen, then Dunn entered the bedroom. Sorry. M told D that pill was underneath the mat. D entered the bedroom, but he never lifted the mat and never personally observed the pill. He did not inspect it. He did not examine an imprint. He did not return later to view it. D's OBRD shows exactly what Dunn personally observed. There is additional evidence from M. At approximately 1702 through 1706:34, M spoke with Impact. She stated, I couldn't see the imprint on it. She further stated, I couldn't see the imprint on it from where I was standing, and she described it as suspected fentanyl. Conflict. Now compare these recordings with Detective O sworn search warrant affidavit. The affidavit attributes to D the statement that he went back inside and observed the pill for myself, and with his expertise came up with what it was. It further states, the affidavit further states, based on his training and experience, D believed it was fentanyl. The affidavit also states that McCumber provided O the same information D provided. That creates an objective conflict. The question is whether D entered the bedroom. He did. The question is whether D personally observed the pill. If his OBRD shows that the pill remained underneath the mat and D never uncovered it or viewed it, that does not match the statement attributed to him. Observed the pill for myself. M's own record also documents that she did not verify the pill, could not see the imprint, and described it as suspected fentanyl. This information is not merely placed in an ordinary report. It was incorporated into a sworn affidavit submitted to a judge to obtain authority to search a home. Accuracy concerns what an officer personally observed is therefore extremely important. I'm not arguing the police need laboratory confirmation before seeking a warrant. I am challenging whether the factual information supplied that warrant accurately described what the officers actually observed. I asked the board to compare M's OBRD, Detective O's sworn affidavit. If the recordings do not support the personal observation attributed to D, I ask the board to reject any findings that fail to address the disciplinary and require or recommend appropriate investigation of potential report accuracy and truthfulness misconduct. Statements made while charges were being developed. APD personnel are required to exercise their authority properly and base enforcement decisions on legitimate facts and circumstances. During M's conversation with Impact, she stated possession of fentanyl, controlled substance. That's pretty much all we're going to be our only charge, because we literally had like no charges. When another possible charge was raised, M responded, I guess we could add to that. Yeah, now that you mention that, we could put that because the little girl would have had access. She could have easily accessed it. These statements were made while M had already acknowledged that she had not verified the pill and could not see the imprint. I'm not claiming those statements alone prove an improper motive. I am saying that they are contemporaneous evidence of how the charges were being developed, and they should have been evaluated together with the arrest and warrant evidence. Enforcement decisions should result from the evidence. When an officer says we literally had no charges and then discusses another charge after it is suggested, the complete context deserves examination. I'm asking the board to determine whether CPOA adequately considered these statements when evaluating the officer's decision-making surrounding the arrest, child-related allegations, and warrant. Restraining order and custody advice. There's an SOP 2-104, civil disputes, governs APD role in civil disputes. APD Personnel Code of Conduct also addresses proper exercise of police authority and impartiality. At approximately 16:39, the recording captures the advice to B, that's a civilian. We can't physically stop you from taking your kid. She was then given a specific option: allow me to keep our daughter for the remainder of the weekend, and Monday morning obtain a restraining order against me, which gives you custody of the child. The officer further explained that doing it that way could allow B, the civilian, to show I'm not trying to be like vengeful about this conflict. That was not simply a statement that B had the right to seek a protection order, obtain legal advice. It described a specific course of action: leave the child for the weekend, seek a restraining order Monday, use the order to obtain custody, and follow that sequence in a way that can demonstrate she was not acting vengefully. Police officers responding to domestic and custody disputes must remain impartial. There is a significant difference between maintaining order, explaining available resources, and advising one party on the strategy concerning custody and future court filings. I asked the board to evaluate the complete recordings under SOP 2-0 or 104 and APD's personal conduct requirements, rather than characterizing the exchange simply as providing information about protective orders. Juvenile Glock and SOP 2-74. 2-74 governs submissions of qualifying cases involving juvenile defendants and contains requirements concerning submissions of required materials. APD documented the offense unlawful possession under 19 of a handgun. On May 7, 2025, APD's narrative states that the juvenile is hereby charged with unlawful possession of a firearm. The report then states, this report will be forwarded to the juvenile probation for further action based on this charge. APD's August 18th CAD later documents that I was told the juvenile had been charged with the matter and it had been sent to JPO. But on September 23rd, Deputy District Attorney Bridget McKinney of the Juvenile Division told me in writing that after checking again, her office did not have a report showing the juvenile as an offender. She further stated that, to her knowledge, neither her office nor the probation had a report. APD's records say the juvenile was charged and the case would be forwarded. I was later told it had been sent. The juvenile DA subsequently said neither the DA nor probation had it. Those statements cannot simply be left unresolved. Why it matters, this involved a 17-year-old and a handgun. APD has a written procedure for processing juvenile cases for a reason. This question isn't whether the cases were eventually handled. This question is whether APD followed the policy that applied when it was supposed to be processed. I asked the board to require one simple piece of information: the actual transmission record. What date was the case sent? Where was it sent? And was that transmission consistent with SOP 2-74? If CPOA determined SOP 2-74 did not apply, I asked the board to identify the basis for that determination. Snapchat and source of the handgun. This concerns the adequacy of APD's investigation of the juvenile firearm incident and proper performance to investigate duties. B, civilian, told APD that her 17-year-old son obtained the handgun through Snapchat. APD documented an unlawful possession offense involving the juvenile, but the record I received raised other obvious questions. Who supplied the handgun to a 17-year-old? The source of the handgun obtained by a juvenile through social media is not a minor detail. Determining who supplied the firearm could identify additional unlawful contact and potentially prevent additional firearms from reaching juveniles. I asked APD and the CPOA to identify what investigative actions have been taken concerning the Snapchat information. Was the seller investigated? Was electronic device evidence sought or preserved? Was an attempt made to identify who supplied the firearm? If it was investigated, show what was done. If it was not, I asked the board to consider that when reviewing the adequacy of the investigation. Glock classified as safekeeping. SOP 2-73 governs APD collection, submission, and depositions of evidence and property. APD's records connect the Glock with the documented juvenile firearm offense. Nevertheless, the firearm was classified as safekeeping. The same firearm was connected to an offense involving unlawful juvenile possession, yet APD's property documentation treated it as safekeeping. Proper evidence classification protects the integrity of criminal investigations and creates an accurate chain of accountability for physical evidence. I asked the board to determine why the firearm was classified as safekeeping and whether the classification complied with SOP 2-73. Prior familiarity and the unfounded findings. Rule SPO 1-01, personal code of conduct prohibits personnel from allowing personal feelings, animosities, or friendships to influence officers' decisions. CPOA classified my prior familiarity allegations as unfounded evidence. My concerns was based on multiple interactions, not simply an accusation. At the beginning of the encounter, B references, I'm not going to say the word, and M appears to immediately understand the location without B explaining it. There's also unusual interactions captured on OBRD involving my young daughter that was addressed in the investigative material. I recognize these observations by themselves do not prove that B and M previously knew each other. My issue is the unfounded findings. There's a difference between saying an allegation could not be proven and affirmatively finding that it was unfounded. If CPOA determined there was no prior familiarity, there should be an investigative basis for that determination. SP 1-01 specifically makes personal relationships and friendships relevant when they influence official decisions. Therefore, when a complainant specifically raises potential prior familiarity during a disputed police encounter adequately, I ask, why was M directly asked whether she had previously met or interacted with B or members of her family? Were prior APD calls or contacts checked? Were the specific OBRD interactions underlying my allegations evaluated? I'm not asking the board to find that M and B definitely knew one another. I am asking whether the investigation actually supports an unfounded finding. Each one of these issues can be evaluated using objective evidence. For the pill and the warrant, compare D's, OBRD, M's, same, and O's, investigator O's affidavit. For the firearm.
Sir, your time is up.
No problem.
Thank you for that. So what we're gonna do now, sir, is I'm gonna have the CPOA do their portion. We'll have APD do their portion, and then you'll have 5 minutes at the end of that, okay? I'll call you back up at the time, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that being said, next up will be 10 minutes for the CPOA Deputy Director or Executive Director? Executive Director? Awesome. Are you ready? Cool. Ms. Baca, ready? Cool, go. Time's yours.
Thank you. So much of what was just covered here was not actually raised in any of the original complaint or as part of the interview. So I'll do my best to respond to some of it, but a lot of it is well outside of the scope of what this investigation was intended to cover or covered to some degree. When he is speaking about the concerns about the warrant and the arrest of the narcotic, the information, again, none of that was raised originally in the complaint. The original case was about the concern over a gun being found at his home. His ex-girlfriend called the police to report that and wanted police to come and retrieve the gun. And then the other aspect of the call for service was the sister of the ex-girlfriend called over concerns of the complainant possibly holding the sister, against her will, not allowing her to leave, things like that. So these are the two issues that the officers were actually arriving to the scene for. And so the officers are speaking to both parties. They are independently obtaining information. There is what's called a team policing concept, which is later to what he was talking about, who saw what and who did what with warrants and things like that. Officers compare, they discuss, they look, they rely on the information of another officer to make certain decisions and assessments. The officers all have a significant amount of training and experience when it comes to identifying narcotics, particularly fentanyl being a common substance that's out on the street. So those types of issues are going to be a part of the decision-making when it's contacting impact, obtaining warrants, things of that nature. So they come, they discuss with both parties what the situation is. The gun was discussed. Officers did take the gun in possession. They did look at that gun and run it for whether it was stolen, whether it was utilized in other crimes. The information did not come back as being connected to anything else. And so there was the determination to decide to put it under safekeeping, although the juvenile was listed as the offender. In one of his written appeal documents, he had said that the report was not connected to the juvenile. It was. The juvenile was identified in the report, and it was identified as an unlawful possession. Unlawful possession is a misdemeanor. The officers were not there to investigate where he obtained the gun from. That would not be a field service role of an officer. That would be something that would happen later. Gun violence intervention unit, and again, I'm going to drift a little bit into future things, but the gun violence intervention unit was involved in this case, so was ACS involved in this case, so there were some subsequent things that were done that are outside of, again, the scope of this particular complaint. When he was asking when was that information forwarded, so the officer filed charges and downloaded the case history in April of 25. There were a clerical issue in terms of tagging. However, the information was sent by SHIELD to the DA's office on April 28th of 25, and uploaded materials on April 30th of 25. The DA had access to those materials. We cannot speak to what the DA does or doesn't do or what information they provide. The complainant did provide an email later after the fact about the September DA saying they had no access to the file or didn't know anything about the case. Again, we can't really speak to what the DA tells people. We have had personal experience in other cases that DAs will say they didn't receive the information when we have, again, conclusive proof they did. So whether they just said that because he's not technically the biological father of this individual, or whether that particular DA didn't know and others did, I can't answer that because that's all part of the DA aspect of things. Then he did contact, as he was saying, some additional people. They followed up. So information was forwarded to the DA's office later as well to confirm charges, things like that. So there is not a specific timeline. He did mention 274, I think, about a submission of materials. So materials were available, they were submitted. In terms of when other things happen, there's not timelines on that of what DAs choose to do or when charges are filed. Basically, the most important thing to remember about that is, as long as it's done within the statute of limitations, that's generally considered, correct. So then there was more information that was submitted to the DA later. Again, there's a lot of things that happened past this date of incident, the complaint incident, that aren't part of this investigation. Again, the concerns about the warrant and the drugs and all of that, that was not something that was raised as part of the complaint. So I can only give you the best in terms of that they do the information they do as a team policing and make the decision of what charges. When he was bringing to the fact that it's suspicious or concerned that the Sergeant M had said, oh yeah, we could add that too. That happens quite often in terms of officers discussing and deciding, should it be this, should it be this, should we add this, that's the whole point. The officers discuss and decide what additional charges and things they may or may not need to apply. Let's see. In terms of the why was he had said something about in one of his appeal things about why was he the only one charged with the narcotic. It was in a location that was allegedly more under his control. He had admitted to officers when this discussion was going on about this incident that he has used narcotics in the past. He had said he was clean. The ex-girlfriend disagrees. So, I mean, you have a difference of opinion between the two parties there as to what the situation was. Something that he didn't raise in this statement here, but was concerned about when he had filed his appeal to you all, was that additional pills had been found. That was explained, that the detective had determined that he was not going to tear the whole house apart to potentially locate a small amount of narcotic. So he didn't make a big disaster of their home, basically. The charge, there was no additional charge from the pills that the ex-girlfriend tried to turn over because there was clearly no chain of custody there. The complainant had said that officers had made up their mind as soon as they got to the call. As I already stated, the officers did interview both parties, gathered statements, looked at what they had, looked at the information. They had to make a decision about what to do with the small child. Both parties were being non-negotiable in terms of who the small child was going to go with. So there had to be some sort of assessment of what they were doing. The discovery of the narcotic did raise concern. I understand the discovery of a firearm also raises concern. That was in the possession of the adults at this point. That was the other factor, is when they showed up, they did not have the juvenile present. They did not have the gun found in the possession of the juvenile because the complainant and the ex-girlfriend had already removed it and rendered it safe, so they had just a misdemeanor outside of the presence. The complainant was alleging that there was this familiarity or favoritism, things like that. Again, he was basing it solely on, at least at the time of the complaint, on what was observed on the video. Again, everyone has observed the video, boards reviewed the video. There is no indication of any familiarity, friendship, knowledge. Some of the suspicious items he had raised were that she said she was going to call. Sergeant M said she was going to call. Standard practice. She obtained the information from the ex-girlfriend at that time. It was not like she had it already or knew it. She said, I will notify you when the house is cleared so that you can return. That's, again, standard practice. He had made some comments that his child reacted certain ways to the officers. Again, a toddler is going to do different things. Young, 3, 4, I'm not sure how old she was. But there was nothing that showed any kind of evidence of favoritism, familiarity. We don't need to dig into histories and all of that. You have to show us some evidence. There's something you have to give us that is showing that there is any kind of level of familiarity. When you observe the OBRD, it's very clear that there's not any familiarity there that would rise to some level of favoritism. Officers didn't decide what to do. They were just assessing everything.
Thank you, Executive Director. With that being said, we have 10 minutes now for APD. Sir,
good evening.
Give me 1 second, okay? Let's get ready real quick. You good with 10 minutes on your timer? And then before you start, of course, just your rank and your name for
Yes.
the minutes so they can take accurate ones. Ready?
Yes.
Awesome. Time is yours, sir.
Good. My name is James Ortiz. I'm the interim commander for the APD's Professional Integrity Division. The role of the Professional Integrity Division is as a disciplinary authority to review the findings of the case if there are sustained findings and to impose discipline to the involved employees. First, I want to acknowledge Mr. O's concerns, particularly regarding the firearm and his dissatisfaction with the call for service and how the incident was handled by the responding officers. Again, my role here is not to decide the criminal charging decisions or the prosecutorial issues. The CPOA did review the complaint. Once the investigation was completed, it was submitted to APD for the disciplinary review. We noted that the CPOA did review all the evidence, conducted interviews of involved parties, looked at the CADs, the dispatch, the body camera, the police reports. The allegation primarily was whether Officer D or Sergeant M acted professionally, promptly, and judiciously within the scope of their duties. And again, based on the CPOA investigation, there was no evidence found that either officer had a relationship with any of the involved parties or violated the cited policy. And for that reason, the Professional Integrity Division did concur with the finding of the CPOA, which was unfounded. And because there was no sustained policy violation, there was no discipline to impose in this case. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Awesome. Mr. Osborne? You can come back up to that podium. So with that, we'll have 5 minutes for rebuttal time for you. And then the time is yours starting now.
So a sworn affidavit doesn't have to tell the truth? Kind of weird to me. And then SP 10 or SP 74 states that they have to turn it in within 24 hours. What Ms. McDermott said, it wasn't turned in for 2 days. So they have standards of procedure for no apparent reason, and that they're not followed, and it's no big deal. I guess that's what APD stating, and the oversight. Those charges were not brought, and nope, they had to be resent by a lieutenant, and I believe it was December of 2025, after I had to pretty much harass him for 3 months. So the familiarity of everything, of each other, there were multiple things. My daughter didn't state this to certain things. She said, uncle, bye uncle. I guess that doesn't, you know, that's not familiarity. I guess it's just a battling toddler, obviously. And if I find a firearm on the floor, isn't that unsafe storage of a weapon? I mean, it shouldn't. I don't know. Sorry, I'm a little more set up for this, and then I heard stuff that I quite don't understand. If an oversight board, I don't understand an oversight board trying to protect the police instead of protect the truth. We're here, I mean, it's that you guys are just gonna be here. I gotta live with this the rest of my life. I haven't seen my child in 10 months because of this. No big deal, right? It is. It really is. So I'm not really sure what else to say. When I said it, there's a lot more to it, but it can't be investigated, I guess, according to Ms. McDermott. Because I didn't bring it up, but I did go to, well, let me see, the original investigator. I tried to give them more information on multiple occasions. The police report is wrote a couple times wrong, or there's more than a couple things. I sent that to, I don't know if it was Ms. McDermott, but someone in the CPOA, and it stated that it would be reviewed or whatever. I've never seen nothing on that. I tried to call this guy, we'll just say K. I text messaged him multiple times. He's the original investigator, trying to give him more stuff, because I don't know if you know, but to get a FOIA, it takes forever to get anything. The search warrant paper, I literally just got a few days ago. So I don't know how I'm supposed to say anything if it takes me that long to get something. There's no reports of the search warrant. There's no papers of it anywhere. It was taken from my house. I was in jail, but it was taken from my house. I don't know where it's at. And the only way that I could receive it from APD records was in disk form, not disk form, but PDF, what the memory sticks. I don't know. I messaged them multiple times. I emailed cops, called cops. Nobody wants to come out. There's multiple videos to watch. I don't know why we just go off of one, but I'm I've had to fill out affidavits for, custody, this custody stuff. If I lie on it, it's perjury. Class D felony is what I'm told. But I guess APD doesn't have to follow the same guidelines as a citizen. But I'll digress now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So at the conclusion of statements, we're going to move into closed session. I move that the board convenes in closed session as authorized by the Administrator of Judiciary Proceedings exceptions to the Open Meetings Act for the limited purpose of discussing the matters presented in CPC 185-25. May I get a second?
Chair, I second that.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Calderon,
Affirm.
Vice Chair Bernardo,
Affirmed.
Member Bolianitz,
Affirm.
Member Duncan,
Affirm.
Member Reichfeld.
Affirm.
Mr. Chairman, that motion passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. With that being said, we'll move into closed session. We'll return shortly. Welcome back. I make a motion that we come out of deliberation. May I get a second, please?
Seconded.
Thank you, Member Bolianis. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Calderon,
Affirm.
Vice Chair Budenaro,
Affirm.
Member Bolianis,
Affirmed.
Member Duncan,
Affirm.
Member Richfield.
Affirm.
Mr. Chairman, that motion is passed unanimously.
Thank you, ma'am. So, awesome. Give me 1 second. Okay, Mr. Osborne, would you mind coming back up to the podium real quick so we can read our response? Awesome. So I'm gonna pass it over to my vice chair. He's gonna read our finding.
The board appreciates the time and effort you took to present your appeal and thanks you for bringing your concerns to both the Civilian Police Oversight Agency and the Civilian Police Oversight Advisory Board. We recognize the importance of providing community members with an opportunity to be heard and to participate in the civilian oversight process. Prior to today's meeting, the board conducted an extensive review of your appeal, the investigative file, available evidence, and case materials, applicable Albuquerque Police Department policies, the findings of the CPOA Executive Director, and the specific concerns and outcomes identified in your appeal. The board also carefully considered the information you presented during today's hearing. In reviewing an appeal, the board must remain within the scope of the authority granted to it by the CPOAB ordinance. We recognize that your appeal raises significant concerns regarding APD's response to the firearms discovered at your residence, the ages of the individuals involved, the handling of the documentation of the firearm, and other evidence, and the actions and decisions of the responding officers. We also recognize your requests for improved training, appropriate disciplinary action, and further action related to the firearm and individuals involved. The board also notes that the scope of any investigation and review is limited to the allegations and issues raised in the original complaint as it was submitted. The board and the CPOA are bound to evaluate the matter based on the contents of that original complaint and the investigative record developed from it, and cannot expand the investigation beyond those originally reported allegations. While these concerns were considered as part of the board's review, decisions regarding whether an individual should be arrested or criminally charged are outside the scope of the board's authority. Similarly, the board's role in an appeal is not to substitute its judgment for that of the CPOA Executive Director simply because a different outcome may have been desired. The board must evaluate the appeal according to the specific standards established by the ordinance. After careful consideration and deliberation, the board concluded that the appeal did not meet the required standard to overturn the findings of the CPOA Executive Director. Specifically, the board did not find that the appeal demonstrated that a policy was misapplied in the evaluation of the complaint, that the findings or recommendations were arbitrary, capricious, or constituted an abuse of discretion, or that the findings and recommendations were inconsistent with the evidence contained in the record. Accordingly, the board concurs with the upholds the findings of the CPOA Executive Director. However, the board recognizes the broader concerns raised through your appeal regarding APD's response to the situations involving firearms and juveniles, including officer decision-making, documentation, evidence handling, and whether existing policies and training provided sufficient established guidance to personnel responding to those circumstances. Although these concerns did not establish a basis for overturning the CPOA Executive Director's finding in the appeal, they may provide valuable information for the board's broader oversight responsibilities. The board also notes that this type of information is used to inform and support future policy reviews, training considerations, and ongoing oversight decisions with the Albuquerque Police Department. Every appeal presented to the board is thoroughly examined regardless of its ultimate disposition. Through that review, the board may identify observations, concerns, or opportunities for improvement that can be formally relayed to APD, and when appropriate, used to initiate further dialogue regarding policies, procedures, training, or other areas within the board's oversight authority. You will receive a written notification of the board's determination, which will summarize the board's finding and the basis for its decision for your appeal on behalf of the board. Thank you again for bringing your concerns forward and for your participation in the oversight process. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. Yes, sir.
I got one question. I'm allowed to put in another appeal, correct? Or not an appeal, I'm allowed to put in more complaints, correct?
Yes, sir. That is
About the
always
same incident or no?
not. How does that work, Executive Director?
If they were not brought up to begin with, but I found them later.
So any complainant may file any complaint, and then it would be received by our intake process and evaluated. If the complaint was basically materially the same as what was already investigated, it would be considered duplicative. If there is something that is dramatically different or something that does need to be looked at, we would review that and possibly assign it for investigation. So I would encourage file the complaint, and then we'll review all the materials and all the requests at that time, and then make a decision based on all of what we have here as to whether or not it would be duplicative or whether it would be a new investigation that we would then look into.
Okay. And Mr. Osborne, on either path, whether if it's a duplicative or if it's a new investigation, you'll be advised, you'll be told in a letter of what path it's going to go down.
So can I, since they didn't respond to me in multiple different facets, who can I go to above them because they don't respond? I mean, I have record of that they do not respond, and what their responses are half-assed and incomplete. But let's be honest.
Can't give guidance specifically other than the appeal process. You can actually appeal to the city's chief administrative officer as well for this specific appeal. For other ones, to the point, you can file additional complaints with the CPOA, and they can look at those individual separate incidents that or items that you're talking about and go from there at that point. If it deems in the light that it needs to go to internal affairs for EPD, they will divert it that way. Or if it has to be handled by the CPOA, they will handle it on their end as well. That's pretty much all I can say on that one.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I'm just trying because it's a very hard process. They get it in, and then they like to brag and say that this process wasn't taken, or oh, we completed this in 75 days. Well, I submitted mine in August, and I got in June is when of the following year is when I got my response. Even though I got emails that state they're going to tell me and this, that, and the other, and I don't know. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. With that being said, do board members have any final notes before we take a vote? Any board members disagree with the findings? Cool. I make a motion that the board concurs with and upholds the findings of the CPO Executive Director for CPC 1-85-25. May I get a second, please?
I second that.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote for the board members concurring in upholding the findings?
Chair Calderon,
Affirm and uphold.
Vice Chair Budinato,
Affirmed.
Member Bolianitz,
Affirmed.
Member Duncan,
Affirmed.
Member Reichveld.
Affirmed.
Mr. Chairman, that motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. 1 second. Let me do the process. With that being said, we're going to move on to CPC 042-26. Is there Miss Melanie Johnson Hope Greenham present? Awesome, ma'am. If you want to have a seat, actually, because we have to have the whole spiel. I don't want you to stand up more than you have to. So I'm going to have my counsel give a whole spiel real quick again. Actually, yes, I will. It's been a time. So, counsel, do you mind taking the mic?
There we go. We are still at the appeal portion of the agenda, and the following process will be applied to this appeal. During the appeal hearing, each interested party has an opportunity to be heard and present arguments stating their position. No new evidence will be permitted to be introduced during the appeal hearing. The hearing today is a quasi-judicial hearing, and the decision will be made by the members of the board. The scope of this appeal will be limited to the complaint and the respective findings of the investigation that followed. If the parties during their presentation go outside of this scope, they may be directed by the chair that the only arguments that will be considered by the board are those relating to the complaint and the subsequent investigation. Again, we are recording this meeting tonight so that a complete, clear record can be created on everything that is being said. However, please remember that we cannot create an accurate record with people talking over one another. If people start to talk over one another, the chair may call for order so that there can be a clear record at the hearing. The following time limits will apply to the presentations. 15 minutes for the complainant who requested the appeal or her representative. The complainant may call witnesses, but this will be counted against her time. 10 minutes will be allotted for the CPOA director or her designee. 5 minutes for the police officer if he or she is present. 10 minutes will be allocated for APD, and 5 minutes for the complainant or their representative to provide a short rebuttal regarding anything that has been presented by the other parties. The parties should avoid using the officer or officers' names during their presentation. If a party uses an officer or officers' names during their presentation, they may be reminded by the chair during their presentation to refrain from continuing to do so. The burden of proof is upon the complainant bringing the appeal to demonstrate, 1, that a policy was misapplied in the evaluation of the complaint, or 2, that the findings or recommendations of the director were arbitrary, capricious, or constituted an abuse of discretion, or 3, that the findings and recommendations of the director were not consistent with the record evidence. These are the only basis upon which the board may modify or change the findings or recommendations of the director. At the end of the parties' presentations, the board will be given an opportunity to ask questions. These questions do not count against the parties' respective presentation time. The questions should be focused on clarifying the record or the argument given and should not offer or invite new information or evidence from a board member through asking the question. The parties are reminded to remain respectful and professional during their presentations. Any disruption of another party's presentation will not and shall not be tolerated. At the close of the hearing, the board will deliberate. The board may make a determination in open session or decide to deliberate in a closed session as allowed by the New Mexico Open Meetings Act. All final decisions by the board will be made in public. Once a decision is made, a final written notice of decision will be provided to all interested parties as provided for in the applicable ordinance.
Thank you, Council. Awesome. Melanie, do you mind coming up to the podium for me, please? Awesome. So with this part, you'll have 15 minutes of time. I saw with the gentleman behind you. Our team here will ring the bell once that 15 minutes is up, and then we'll continue that process, okay? Time is yours when you're ready.
Yes, hi, good evening. My name is Melanie Johnson Hope Greenham, and I timely requested an appeal regarding the Civilian Police Oversight Advisory Board decision concerning the exonerated findings issued in CPC number 042-26. I challenge the determination that Sergeant R, and to the extent the same reasoning was applied, Officer B, complied with APD policy by treating my report of custodial interference as only a civil custody dispute. This appeal satisfies each of the grounds, in my opinion, identified in the findings letters, that APD policy was misapplied, the exonerated findings were arbitrary, capricious, or an abuse of discretion, and the findings were not consistent with the record evidence. The CPOA's appeal rules authorize modification on any one of those grounds. SOP 2-104 limits officers' immediate role in changing custody, but it does not eliminate their criminal investigation duties. The central error in the findings was treating SOP 2-104 as though it created a categorical exemption from criminal investigation whenever a child custody order exists. SOP 2-104 has a limited purpose. It governs APD's response to civil disputes and states that APD's primary purpose in responding to those disputes is restoring order. In an ordinary custody dispute involving a parenting plan, officers are instructed not to order or force the removal of a child from the current custodial parent. They are instead to restore order, advise the parties to seek legal advice, and completely document the incident in a uniform incident report. That restriction addresses what officers may physically do at the scene. It prevents officers from using police authority to adjudicate competing interpretations of a parenting plan or to transfer physical custody without a judicially signed pickup order, an enforceable order of protection, or another recognized legal basis. SOP 2-104 does not state that every custody-related incident is exclusively civil. It does not define custodial interference, and it does not repeal or narrow NMSA 1978, Section 30-4-4. It does not authorize a supervisor to prevent a suspected felony from being investigated, documented, or submitted for prosecutorial review. Most importantly, the policy expressly requires officers to completely document the incident, which is inconsistent with using SOP 2-104 as a reason to shut down further criminal review. An officer can comply with SOP 2-104 by declining to forcibly change physical custody at the scene while simultaneously complying with APD's criminal investigation and felony submission policies. Those are separate functions, and restoring order does not mean ignoring evidence of a felony. Section 30-4-4 expressly applies when both people possess custody rights. The exonerated findings also misapprehend the offense itself. Custodial interference was written specifically to address conduct by a person who has a right to custody, but maliciously takes, detains, conceals, entices away, or fails to return a child without good cause, and with the intent to deprive another person who also has a right to custody from exercising their right to custody, either permanently or for a protracted time. The legislature classified that conduct as a fourth-degree felony. Therefore, the existence of a parenting plan, concurrent custody rights, visitation rights, or a civil domestic relations case does not automatically remove the conduct from the criminal statute. The fact that both people possess custody rights is built into the statutory definition of custodial interference. New Mexico Court of Appeals has explained that Section 30-4-4 is intended to prevent a person with custodial rights from disrupting another person's custodial rights. The court identified the core injury as the intentional disruption or deprivation of the other person's established custody rights. Taking, detaining, concealing, and failing to return are the different means by which that deprivation can be accomplished. Both taking interference and failing to return interference require malice and an intent to deprive the other person permanently or for a protracted period. Accordingly, the proper question was not merely whether a custody order existed. The proper questions were, did each person have a right to custody? Did one person take, detain, conceal, entice away, or fail to return the child at the court-ordered time and place? Was that person's conduct malicious and without good cause? Did that person intend to deprive the other person of custody permanently or for a protracted time? And did the other person actually suffer the intended deprivation of custody? The findings letters do not identify which of those elements was supposedly unsupported. They simply state that Sergeant R. believed custodial interference was not appropriate, and that he characterized the matter as civil, and that an unidentified person at the district attorney's office allegedly agreed. This is not an element-by-element evaluation of Section 30-4-4. Not every missed child exchange, late return, or disagreement over a parenting plan constitutes custodial interference. But where evidence indicates malicious detention or failure to return a child to another person with custody rights, absence of good cause, and an intent to deprive the other custodial parent for a protracted period, the matter cannot be rejected merely because it arose in the context of a civil custody order. The civil order establishes the parties' respective custody rights. It does not immunize intentional interference with those rights. APD's other policies required criminal documentation, investigation, and felony referral. The CPOA evaluated the officer's conduct almost exclusively through SOP 2-104. That was a material policy error because APD has separate directly applicable policies governing criminal reports, criminal investigations, and non-arrest felony submissions. SOP 2-16 requires department personnel to complete a uniform incident report for all felony, misdemeanor, and petty misdemeanor crimes. SOP 2-60 states that APD must quickly and effectively investigate crimes. It defines a preliminary investigation as determining whether a crime was committed and who committed it, identifying the victim, collecting evidence, and documenting investigative tasks. Follow-up investigation is directed toward gathering evidence and information needed to prove the elements of the particular offense and support an arrest or prosecution. At the conclusion of the preliminary investigation, the primary officer must consider whether additional information would supplement a prosecution or whether the case should be referred for follow-up. If the case remains with the officer, that officer remains responsible for necessary follow-up unless directed otherwise by a supervisor. APD also directs personnel to prepare cases for prosecution under the felony submission policy. SOP 2-74 applies to adult defendants suspected of committing a felony. Its stated purpose is to ensure complete felony cases are submitted to the district attorney in a timely manner. For a non-arrest case, sworn personnel are directed to notify the SHIELD unit, identify the matter as a non-arrest case, complete the uniform incident report and supporting documentation, and notify SHIELD when the investigation is complete. SHIELD then sends the materials to the district attorney. SOP 1-19 identifies the SHIELD unit as APD's central point of contact for adult felony discovery. It specifically provides that SHIELD personnel shall submit full, non-arrest discovery to the district attorney for review and possible prosecution when the case is submitted by sworn personnel. SHIELD also reviews prosecutorial declination notices demonstrating that the written procedure contemplates a trackable prosecutorial review process. These policies are not inconsistent with SOP 2104. They operate together. So under SOP 2104, officers do not forcibly transfer a child merely because one party presents a parenting plan. Under SOPs 2-16 and 2-60, officers document and investigate facts indicating a criminal offense. Under SOP 2-74, a suspected non-arrest felony is routed to the SHIELD unit. And under SOP 1-19, SHIELD forwards the completed materials to the district attorney for review and possible prosecution. The CPOA's interpretation effectively allowed one sentence in a civil disputes policy to nullify APD's entire felony investigation and referral framework, and nothing in SOP 2-104 supports that result. And the findings are internally inconsistent with the record. The findings themselves show why the exoneration cannot stand. The CPOA officer found that Officer V initially tagged the SHIELD unit. Sergeant R then untagged SHIELD because he believed custodial interference was not appropriate and instructed Officer V not to pursue charges. Later, Sergeant R and Lieutenant H prepared supplemental reports and forwarded them to SHIELD to allow SHIELD and the DA's office to make the final decision. Those conclusions are irreconcilable. If the SHIELD unit and district attorney were the proper entities to make the final decision, then Sergeant R's initial decision to remove SHIELD from the case and direct Officer V not to proceed was premature. The later referral was not proof that the earlier decision complied with policy. It was a reversal of that decision and an eventual use of the process that should not have been blocked in the first place. The findings cannot logically hold that both Sergeant R properly prevented the felony referral because the matter was civil, and that SHIELD and the district attorney were the appropriate entities to make the final decision. The latter conclusion confirms the misapplication of SOP 2-104. The unexplained reference to a district attorney consultation does not establish APD policy compliance. The findings state that Sergeant R consulted with the district attorney's office and that the office agreed custodial interference did not fit the criteria. But the findings do not identify the prosecutor or employee consulted, the date or manner of the consultation, the evidence or facts presented, which statutory element was considered missing, whether the custody order and relevant communications were reviewed, whether the advice was documented, or whether a formal prosecutorial declination was issued. APD policy encourages officers to consult prosecutors during an investigation for guidance, but that consultation exists alongside, rather than in place of, the formal procedures for completing and submitting non-arrest felony cases. Moreover, the administrative issue before the CPOA was whether APD personnel complied with APD policy. An undocumented charging opinion does not answer whether Sergeant R was authorized under SOP 2-14 to untag the SHIELD unit or prevent completion of APD's prescribed felony referral process. If the CPOA intended to rely on the district attorney consultation as the basis for exoneration, the record needed to establish what facts were presented and why the statutory elements of custodial interference were not met. Without that information, the consultation is an unsupported conclusion, not substantial evidence of policy compliance. And application of the statutory elements to the evidence The distinction between a routine civil disagreement and criminal custodial interference depends on the evidence of intent and deprivation. The record should therefore be evaluated under the actual elements of Section 30-4-4, because rather than the general label of custody dispute. The operative custody order dated November 13th, 2025 gave me the right to visitation, which is physical custody, with my 2 children every Saturday from 4:30 p.m. until 6:30 p.m. at Neutral Corner in Albuquerque without exception. On January 23rd of 2026, the children's father instructed Neutral Corner in writing to discontinue court-ordered visitation services and close our file, as he would not be bringing the children for any further visits with me. He then failed to return the children to my physical custody at the court-ordered time and place on January 24th. He has withheld the children from me ever since, resulting in his unlawful detainment of them for 7 consecutive months and counting. I provided APD with all relevant court orders, emails, and other written messages regarding the violation of Section 30-4-4. I also provided evidence negating good cause, including the court's finding, including indicating that the children's father had previously made unfounded allegations of child abuse against me to interfere with valid custody orders, giving me rights to custody. These facts were evidence of malicious detention or failure to return, absence of good cause, an intent to deprive me of my custody rights for a protracted period, and the actual deprivation of those rights. Whether that evidence ultimately proves his guilt is a prosecutorial and judicial question. But APD was required to assess and process it under the criminal statute and its felony procedures, rather than terminate the matter under SOP 2-104. Section 30-4-4 also states that custodial interference is continuous for as long as the child remains concealed or detained, and permits, but does not require, dismissal of a felony charge when the child is voluntarily returned within 14 days. These provisions further demonstrate that the legislature treated prolonged withholding of and eventual return as matters governed by criminal law, not automatically as civil enforcement issues. The 14-day provision should not be misrepresented as a minimum duration required for the offense, as protracted time is a fact-dependent element, and the New Mexico cases do not establish a categorical 14-day safe harbor. So the grounds for modifying the changes: the exonerated findings should be modified for 3 independent reasons. First, the policy was misapplied. SOP 2-104 was treated as authority to terminate a potential felony case, even though the policy governs immediate peacekeeping and physical custody enforcement. The CPOA failed to evaluate the officer's actions under SOPs 2-16, 2-60, 2-74, and 1-19. Second, the findings were arbitrary and capricious. They contained no reasoned analysis of the statutory elements, no explanation of what evidence was presented to the district attorney, and no explanation for why a civil disputes policy displaced APD's felony investigation and submission procedures. Third, the findings were inconsistent with the record evidence. The record establishes that Sergeant R removed Shield from the case, directed Officer V not to proceed, and later forwarded supplemental reports to Shield. The rest of it is already in my appeal documents.
Perfect, thank you. With that being said, we'll move on to 10 minutes from the CPOA Executive Director, correct? Okay. You all ready? Time starts now.
Okay. We'll try and make this quick. So first off, one thing to clarify in all of this is supervised visits are not the same as custody. That's one important thing to mention here. But in terms of 2104, yes, we looked at that because that is the most applicable policy that applies in this situation. That does not mean that other policies were not reviewed and looked at. The CPOA disputes the assertion that the investigations were only based on the 2104 and that there was some categorical exclusion. We look at a multifaceted interpretation of policies and review them to determine what is the most applicable policy when we actually cite in the file and the letter. She asserted that the restoring order does not exclude a felony. Again, yes, investigators and officers at the time review the situation, review the facts, and make a determination what is going to happen, what is going to apply. We make our decisions after we interview everyone, review all the evidence, We only cited the one policy because that was the most applicable. Again, when the discussion was 30-4-4 applies when both people have custody, which she would mention. CPOA disagrees with the assertion. We're not tasked with, nor should we, conduct an element by element on a law. We are looking at the policy and the following of that policy. We can understand what she's saying in terms of the statute. We agree what she wrote about the statute is accurate, but our scope is limited to how are the officers interpreting that, what did they research, what did they look at, what did they decide, and decide whether or not charges are appropriate. Stating that APD policies require criminal documentation. So we disagree with the assertion being inaccurate that it was only, again, through 2104. She listed many different SOPs, but said that we only reviewed the one. Again, we did review multiple different issues. At the time, she was informed by Officer V that she was not sure if custodial interference would even apply in this situation and would have to confirm with the supervisor. Supervisor did look at the situation and make a determination that it did not apply. And one of the primary reasons that that was made is that the father of the situation made requests through Neutral Corner, which is the business that does these type of exchanges, and that was through those channels. And we have some court, sorry, the word is escaping me, right, but some court documents that are also laying out when these visitations are to occur. So everything was happening through either the Neutral Corner process or the court process. I know that the complainant believed that she supplied sufficient information. She said she provided emails and various documentations. The only thing that was actually provided to the officers at the time were the 2 court orders that talked about visitation and the letter from Neutral Corner that basically said we're not taking these folks as clients anymore because there were multiple court, which are available through public record, multiple court findings that these issues were going on between the 2 parties. Essentially, you have 2 parties who have been protracted court agreements and disagreements and dealing with that. And Neutral Corner on, I think that was the 3rd occasion, which was the one that is a part of this, said, you know, we can't accept them as clients anymore. So these things were happening through a process as opposed to the 30-44 custodial interference issues, which are a totally different animal from the type of circumstances that were happening here. And again, supervised visits versus custody, 2 different situations. So the CPOA investigator was informed by Sergeant R that when he contacted the DA, that it was not meeting criteria. We have the information in the investigative report, which both board and complainant received, that the DA did make that decision that it did not fit the criteria. That is standard. Officers contact on-call DAs all the time to try and determine, hey, this is what I'm presented with, what should I do? And then DAs provide that guidance and make that determination, and then the charging individuals or potential charging individuals decide to go with it, figure out what they need to do. She was saying that the fact that they ultimately sent the information to SHIELD and ultimately sent it over is proof that the wrong call was made in the first place. The sergeant and lieutenant basically discussed the situation. At the lieutenant's decision, mostly to appease the complainant, decided to go ahead and send it to SHIELD as the final decider of the situation to go to the DA's office. But that is not any kind of an admission or an agreement that it was actually the proper or necessary course of action. It was simply because the complainant pretty much insisted, and rather than disagree and continue to disagree, they said, fine, we'll go ahead and send it over there. So that shouldn't be taken as a, oh, obviously they did it wrong because they ultimately did it how the complainant believed was right. I know the complainant, again, believed that she had sent sufficient information to prove that there was this custodial interference, but again, the only information that was provided was the 2 court orders and the letter from neutral corner. That does not establish the guidance of a custodial interference when you have all the different points. So in terms of the report does show who the information was sent to in terms of the consultation. So just to kind of go through the last three things. So policy misapplied, we disagree that 2104 was misapplied. It was clear that it's for a custody dispute. Multiple other policies were reviewed. We evaluated things under 216 and 260. We determined then I think 216 was used for one of the aspects of it, so that alone kind of shows that we looked at these other policies, and a couple of the other policies she's mentioned were not deemed to be applicable to site as one of the findings. Arbitrary and capricious, we disagree. The role is to assess whether officers followed policy. The incident arose from this desire to have charges placed. The situation arose because there was a request to change schedule that the other party didn't agree with, and that causes it to have to go to court to figure that out. But they are bound by policy, and they can't just make felony charges because one party says so. They have to have enough probable cause and enough information to actually determine to establish those charges. Again, there's been multiple back and forth between the two parties, charges placed on both, charges dismissed, charges placed. So it's been a back and forth with these two individuals for a long time. And then the findings being inconsistent with the record evidence, we disagree. Sergeant R has the duty to supervise the officers, and he needs to make the assessment if this is an improper decision, meaning sending the charges through. It's his job to make sure that his officer isn't making a mistake such as that. And so it is his call to decide that this was an improper decision, and that is what he did. And so that is why he reversed the charges, because there was not the burden of proof necessary to place the charges on the individual. Again, consulted with a DA to do so. That is what they are supposed to do. And at the end of the day, it was a custody dispute. There was not sufficient evidence for custodial interference. And the fact that they sent the information to SHIELD ultimately, again, was more just to appease the complainant than any wrongdoing. I think that's it.
Thank you, Executive Director. We'll move on next to the 10 minutes for APD. Commander Ortiz. Give us 1 second, sir. Ready? Cool. Time is yours, sir.
Thank you. My name is James Ortiz. I'm the interim commander for APD's Professional Integrity Division. Professional Integrity Division is a disciplinary authority for APD personnel, sworn and non-sworn. So my role today was limited in that administrative disciplinary review of this case. So again, I'm not deciding whether there was criminal charges, whether they should have been criminal charges, or how the family court should have addressed the issue. In this case, I did concur with the CPOA's sustained finding against Officer B. The sustained finding was for failing to submit a police report in a timely manner by the end of shift. The corrective disciplinary action for that violation was an enhanced supervisory intervention. There were other issues. For the remaining issues, I did concur with the CPOA's findings of exonerated for those issues. Based on the completed administrative investigation, there was no additional sustained policy beyond the late report that was identified, and so there was no additional discipline that was imposed.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Board members, any questions? I think we didn't ask that. Sorry, cool. Awesome. Okay. So with that being said, Melanie, we have an additional 5 minutes allotted to you for rebuttal, if you would like to use that.
Sure, yes. Okay, so first the comment that supervised visits are not physical custody is categorically incorrect. They provide absolutely no legal authority for that conclusion. The statute's very clear. Visitation is considered physical custody for the purposes of custodial interference criminal charges. The letter from Neutral Corner very clearly states that they closed our file because Mr. Greenham wrote them and told them to. So all of my visits were immediately canceled because he told them to close the file. He was not bringing the children anymore. The letter from Neutral Corner states that. As far as it being a rescheduling dispute, Mr. Greenham and Neutral Corner, neither of them could even reschedule the visits. The court order was very specific, the day, the time that the visits had to be on. So the argument that this was a scheduling dispute or that there was some attempt to reschedule the visits to another day there's no legal authority for that argument at all. The court order states exactly the days that the visits are to happen, the place, the time, everything. As far as whether or not it was a wrong call made in the first place and that they only finally submitted the information to SHIELD to appease me because I was insisting, there is absolutely nothing in the record that supports that. I personally watched all of the body camera video just to refresh my memory, and at no point in time was I insisting. Officer V was very clear. She was actually going back to her car to file the criminal charges, and she came back and said that she couldn't actually file the criminal charges, but that she would send it to SHIELD. At no point in time did Officer V even show any hesitation that she was going to actually follow through with getting these things to SHIELD, and she did tag SHIELD. And this all came down to Sergeant R deciding that he was going to untag it and consider it a custody dispute and not even have the report written up as a custodial interference call, which is what it was. So, Sergeant R's call, he also stated in his interview with the investigator that he rarely sees custodial interference filed as a charge. He doesn't really deal with it very much, and that he stated that he made the decisions based on his own experience. Now, I'm not sure if that means his personal experience, like if he's got custody issues or something, or somebody he knows closely, but it definitely seems to me when I read the investigator's interview with him that this was based on not a review of the law and the policy, but on his personal bias as to whether or not this should be even forwarded on to the DA's office for consideration for criminal charges. And the officer's comment about how family court should address the issue. Family court is not a criminal court. Family court is the civil court. I mean, this is basically like telling people that if you experience a burglary, that we're not going to follow up on criminal charges, you need to go to civil court. Or if there's a death, we're not going to look into homicide. You need to go to civil court and pursue for wrongful death. There's two completely separate things going on. Family court only handles the civil side of it, the visitation orders. They're not going to press charges for custodial interference. That's the job of the police. That's the job of the district attorney. It's a completely separate process that's going on than what family court does. And so I think that there's a serious problem with APD and how they're interpreting this policy 2-104 and saying that basically anything that comes across their calls that involves custody between two people who have custody rights, that this is just a civil thing and we're not even going to follow the law for custodial interference. And 30-4-4 is very clear, Section B, that involves two people who have custody rights. And numerous times throughout this investigation, I was told by numerous different police officers that they can only use the custodial interference statute when one person has no right to custody at all. And that's absolutely not true. I think that's Section C. Section B specifically addresses when two people have custody rights. Whether that's because one person has primary custody and the other has visitation is irrelevant. They both have custody rights. And so custodial interference, maybe a lot of police officers also say they get these kind of calls a lot. They kind of roll their eyes like, oh my gosh, we've got another one of these. Well, maybe one of the reasons why they're getting so many of these calls is because they're just pushing everybody off. They're not filing charges when they could be filed. Thank you.
Thank you. With that being said, board members, any questions? That's for who? For who? Mr. Greenham, Melanie, Can you come up real quick? One of our board members has a question for you real fast.
Hi, Mr. Graham. Again, thanks for coming in and filing this appeal here. One of the questions that I have for you is, what are you hoping to get out of this deliberation? What's your preferred or ideal outcome?
I believe that the finding of exoneration, specifically against Sergeant R. Officer V, especially in refreshing my memory, going back over all of the body camera video and everything, I feel that she was trying to do the right thing. She was trying to file the charges. She was trying to at least send the information to SHIELD to have it sent on. And this was purely because of Sergeant R, who short-circuited the whole thing. I want the finding of exoneration overturned against Sergeant R, and I do plan on addressing this further, and in any way, shape, or form that the CPOA can assist with this. This seems to be a very serious training issue within the APD, that they are not treating these custodial interference incidents seriously. And you've got tons of parents who are losing time with their children because the APD just treats it like it's all just a civil problem, go back to family court. I cannot tell you how many times I was told, well, you have to take that to family court. They'll handle that. Family court does not handle criminal issues. They cannot file criminal charges. They're just going to write up a new custody order, a new visitation plan. So what I'm looking for is that the exoneration against Sergeant R is overturned. I would like for this to be put on, however you guys do it, that this is a training issue within APD, probably systemically, and I do plan on following up on that as well with APD directly with the policy division, that this is possibly a really serious systemic training issue within APD as a whole.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Perfect. Awesome. That's it. Perfect. So with that, make a motion that the board convenes in closed session as authorized by the Administrative Adjudicatory Proceedings, exception to the Open Meetings Act for the limited purpose of discussing the matters presented in CPC 042-26. May I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Member Williams. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Calderon,
Affirm.
Vice Chair Budunaro,
Affirmed.
Member Bolianitz,
Affirm.
Member Duncan,
Affirm.
Member Reichfeld.
Affirm.
Mr. Chairman, this motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. With that being said, we'll be in closed session. We'll return shortly. Welcome back. Make a motion that we come out of deliberation. May I get a second, please?
Seconded.
Thank you, Member Bolianis. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Calderon,
Affirmed.
Vice Chair Bludenaro,
Affirmed.
Member Bolianis,
Affirmed.
Member Duncan,
Affirmed.
Member Reichfeld.
Affirmed.
Mr. Chairman, that motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. Okay, perfect. Ms. Greenham, do you mind coming up to the podium real quick? So I'm gonna start my computer, gotta read my long spiel. So the board appreciates the time and efforts you took to present your appeal, and thank you for bringing your concerns to both the Civilian Police Oversight and the Civilian Police Oversight Advisory Board. We recognize the importance of providing community members with the opportunity to be heard and to participate in the Civilian Police Oversight process. Prior to today's meeting, the board conducted an extensive review of your appeal, the investigative file, available evidence, and case materials, applicable APD policies, the findings of the CPO Executive Director, and the specific outcomes you requested through your appeal. The board also carefully considered the information presented during today's hearing. In reviewing your appeal, the board must remain within the scope of the authority granted to it by the CPOAB ordinance. While you recognize your request that felony custodial interference charges be filed and that the processing of materials necessary for prosecution be expedited, decisions regarding the filing or prosecution of criminal charges are outside the scope of the board's authority. The board's review of this appeal is therefore limited to determining whether the CPOA's executive director's findings should be upheld or overturned under standards established by the ordinance. After careful consideration and deliberation, the board concluded that the appeal did not meet the requirement standards to overturn the findings of the CPOA executive director. Specifically, the board did not find that the appeal demonstrated that a policy was misapplied in the evaluation of the complaint, and that the findings or the recommendations were arbitrary, capricious, or constituted an abuse of discretion, or that the findings and recommendations were inconsistent with the evidence contained in the record. Accordingly, the board concurs with and upholds the findings of the CPOA executive director. However, the board also recognizes that the concerns raised through your appeal regarding APD's handling of complaints involving alleged criminal custodial interference, including your concerns regarding the timeliness of the process, applicable policies, procedures, and training of APD personnel. Although these concerns do not in themselves establish a bias or basis, for overturning the CPOA's executive director's findings, they are matters that the board may consider within the scope of the broader oversight responsibilities. The board will also forward the relevant policies areas identified through this appeal to the policy subcommittee for review and consideration. Every appeal presented to the board is thoroughly examined regardless of its ultimate disposition. Through that review, the board may identify observations, concerns, or opportunities for improvement that can formally be relayed to APD, and when appropriate, use to initiate further dialogue regarding the review of policies, procedures, training, or other areas within the board's oversight authority. An appeal therefore provides the board not only the opportunity to review the individual determination, but also an opportunity to identify potential systemic issues that may warrant further discussion. You'll receive a written notice notification of the board's determination, which will summarize the board's findings and the basis of its decisions regarding your appeal. On behalf of the board, thank you again for bringing your concerns forward and your participation in the civilian police oversight. With that being said as well, we will forward this off to our subcommittee policy subcommittee to review this policy out of cycle, but also these policies do come up in cycle to be reviewed, just to see if we can make it better, right? So officers have better training, have better understanding of what's expected of them and what they can and cannot do, right? So we work with APD, their legal team, and different stuff like that to see what we can get to a resolution if there's something we can do there. Those meetings are public as well. They are posted. They're every first Thursday of the month, correct? Yep. Am I lying? Yeah, first Thursday of the month at our main offices, typically at 3 p.m.? 3 p.m. So they're posted, and we post exactly what policies we'll review that day or that month, So you're more than welcome. Please show up there. We welcome the public input because we need it, right? And it helps us. So there's that one. So we will send you a letter with the final determination, and we thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that being said, do any board members have any final? Perfect. I make a motion that the board concurs with and upholds the findings of the CPO Executive Director for CPC 042-26. May I get a second?
I second that.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Calderon,
Affirmed.
Vice Chair Bludenaro,
Affirmed.
Member Bolianis,
Affirmed.
Member Duncan,
Affirm.
Member Reichfeld.
Affirmed.
Mr. Chairman, that motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. With that being said, we're going to move on to the next order of business, which will be our serious use of force cases. The first case to to be reviewed today will be APD case number 25-0084921, presented by Vice Chair Budonado. Sir?
Thank you, Chair. This case report, APD case 25-0084921. This use of force was October 9th, 2025, located at 5851 Anderson Avenue Southeast at approximately 5:41 p.m. Albuquerque Police Department officers responded to a call for service at 5851 Anderson Avenue Southeast, an apartment complex where a manager had requested the removal of several transient individuals from the premises. What began as a routine contact escalated into a physical confrontation, resulting in the documented use of force that has been since reviewed by Internal Affairs Force Division. Officers made contact with a group near the southwest corner of the property. One of the individuals, identified in the case records only as Miss B, a 33-year-old woman, was observed seated on a sidewalk step holding what the officers described as a glass bubble pipe. Officers instructed Miss B to drop the item and stand up. She complied, placing her hands behind her back, and was handcuffed without incident. The situation shifted during escort to the patrol unit. Miss B became verbally aggressive, yelling obscenities at officers. As she reached the hood of the vehicle, she began actively resisting, kicking her legs backwards in an attempt to strike the officers. Officers reported that de-escalation was not feasible given how quickly the encounter moved from verbal aggression to a physical resistance. During the confrontation, Ms. B kicked one of the officer's legs, made a swift head movement that led an officer to believe she intended to spit, headbutt, or bite, and continued to resist despite repeated attempts to control her movements. Officers responded with a combination of level 1 pain compliance techniques and level 3 empty hand controls, including wrist locks and an open palm strike to the cheek, and force used to bring Miss B to a prone position. A total of 6 uses of force were documented across both officers. Medical personnel responded to the scene. Miss B was subsequently transported to the Prisoner Transport Center and later booked in the Metropolitan Detention Center. She faces charges of possession of a controlled substance, paraphernalia, battery on a peace officer ×2, assault on a peace officer ×2, and resisting, evading, and obstructing an officer. One officer sustained minor abrasions on her left index finger and redness to her left knee. Ms. B sustained no injuries. Following a full IAFD review, all 6 uses of forces were determined to be objectively reasonable, minimal, and necessary under the totality of circumstances, and each was found to be within APD policy. No violations of standard operating procedure, personnel rules, or administrative instructions were identified. No deficiencies were found in tactics, training, policy, or supervision. However, reviewers did note one equipment concern, which has been flagged for follow-up. Deputy Director Abbasi, do you have anything additional to add to this one?
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the board. The use of empty hand techniques, as Member Budonaro stated, and the pain compliance technique, as well as the application of passive restraint system, and this use of spit sock, in this case, they were all considered lower level of force utilized by officer without increasing the risk to themselves or the subject of force relative to the resistance that was posed by the subject based on the totality of the circumstance. The equipment deficiency that Member Budonaro noted was a concern that one officer who was on scene did not have access to the device, the passive restraint system, while he was on duty. One last thing that I want to mention, that during the Force Review Board review of this case, there was a question that was raised about officers notifying subjects that she was detained and then telling them that she was arrested. It was noted by the commander at the time that they were observing the issue of arrest and detention being used interchangeably by officers, and a department-wide memorandum was sent out to address this issue.
Thank you, sir. Acting Commander Nico.
Congratulations on the promotion.
Sorry about the pay. No. Do you have anything to add to that, sir?
No. Very thorough review. I appreciate it. Any questions if there are?
Perfect, thank you. Board members have any questions for CPOA or APD? No. Do we concur with the findings? Concur with the findings? Thank you. Perfect. With that being said, I make a motion the Civilian Police Oversight Advisory Board affirms and upholds the findings of APD's Internal Affairs Force Division investigation for APD case number 25-00844921. May I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Member Williams. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote?
Chair Calderon,
Affirm.
Vice Chair Brudenaro,
Affirmed.
Member Bolianis,
Affirm.
Member Duncan,
Affirmed.
Member Reichfeld.
Affirm.
Mr. Chairman, that motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. Thank you, Vice Chair. With that being said, we'll move on to APD case number 25-00848871, presented by Member Rossfield. The floor is yours, sir.
Yes, thank you, Chair. On this case, we're going to review this case, use of force case number 25-00848871. On the afternoon of October 9th, 2025, detectives from the Albuquerque Police Department Felony Apprehension Support Team were set up near 224 Atrisco Vista Boulevard Southeast, conducting mobile surveillance on 38-year-old Ismael Martinez. Mr. Martinez was wanted on active violent felony warrants, including charges for kidnapping, criminal solicitation to commit sexual penetration in the fourth degree, and criminal sexual contact of a minor. At around 3:20 p.m., the situation shifted quickly. Officers positioned in front of the residence spotted Mr. Martinez slipping out from the south side of the home and making a sudden break to the east. Detectives on the perimeter immediately sought cover behind their vehicles and tried to manage the situation from a distance, shouting verbal commands, "Police, hands up." Ignoring the orders, Mr. Martinez locked eyes with officer number 1 and sprinted toward a nearby fence, attempting to scale it to evade capture. Recognizing the immediate need to stop his escape, officer number 1 fired a single 40mm less lethal impact round. The round struck Mr. Martinez on the left side of his lower back, stopping his momentum. The less lethal strike brought an abrupt end to the pursuit. Mr. Martinez turned back toward the arrest team, walked into the middle of the street, and complied with the officers by laying face down with his arms spread wide. Officers moved in and placed him in handcuffs without further incident. Mr. Martinez remained fully cooperative from that moment on. Medical personnel attended to Mr. Martinez on scene for a circular welt on his lower back. No officers were injured during the apprehension. Mr. Martinez was subsequently booked on his outstanding violent felony warrants, as well as additional charges for resisting, evading, and obstructing. Following an investigation by the Internal Affairs Force Division, the Force Review Board officially determined that the deployment of the 40mm round was objectively reasonable, minimal, necessary, and fully within APD policy, with no tactical, supervisory, or procedural deficiencies identified. And that is all. Deputy Abassi, please, if you have anything else to add.
Chair and members of the board, nothing to add.
Perfect, thank you. Acting Commander. Perfect, thank you.
So.
Perfect. Board members, do you have any questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead, sir.
Acting Commander Nico, I did see in the notes that there was no training deficiencies, but when I watched the video, the person who deployed the 40 didn't say 40, 40, 40, which I believe was a training thing that they do say, right?
So what you're referring to is a force announcement.
Yeah.
And what we end up doing is that's one of the things that, yes, there is a policy requirement for that and a training requirement. There are times when it's not always feasible, so we have to look at the feasibility of whether the force announcements were actually feasible. And in this particular case, because of the speed of the actions of the individual, At that point, everyone knew that that officer was deploying with a 40 millimeter, so we determined that the announcements were not feasible and were not necessary at that point, so.
Yeah, I heard that, I went, huh. So, I just was curious. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Any further questions? Perfect. Thank you, sir. Do we agree with the findings from APD? Yes. All right, okay, perfect. So with that being said, I make a motion that the Civilian Police Oversight Advisory Board affirms and upholds the findings of APD's Internal Affairs Force Division investigation for APD case number 25-008481. May I get a second, please?
I second that.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Calderon,
Affirm.
Vice Chair Bludenaro,
Affirmed.
Member Bolianis,
Affirmed.
Member Duncan,
Affirmed.
Member Redfield.
Affirm.
Mr. Chairman, that motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. With that being said, we'll move on to the next order of business, which will be officer-involved shooting cases. First up will be APD case number 25-00581118, presented by Member Williams. Sir?
Thank you, Chair. On July 15th, 2025, at approximately 1700 hours, officers responded in the Northwest regarding an intoxicated suicidal male who reportedly ingested sleeping pills and had access to firearms. Officers contacted Mr. J's wife, removed her from the immediate area for safety, and established a perimeter and developed a response plan. Personnel attempted to establish communication with Mr. J and utilize verbal persuasion to de-escalate tactics in order to gain his voluntary surrender. During the incident, Mr. J displayed a handgun and moved between several locations around and inside the residency. At approximately 1838, Mr. J fired multiple rounds towards officers from an upstairs window. Several officers returned fire as Mr. J continued shooting. Approximately 4 minutes later, Mr. J was observed in the garage, pointing a firearm in the direction of the officers. Officer S fired 1 round, striking Mr. J in the chest. Mr. J fell to the ground and dropped the firearm. At approximately 1908, officers formed the force array to secure and handcuff Mr. J. Force used, Officer 1, 10 in policy rifle discharges, Officer 2, 4 rifle discharges, Officer 3, 3 rifle discharges, Officer 4, 1 rifle discharge, and then this is just a show of force, but it is labeled as level 1 back in time of Officer 1 and Officer 5 pointing, rifle pointing at the individual, which was in policy. Based on the totality of circumstances, it was reasonable, minimal, and necessary. Mr. J was deceased when taken into custody. Medical was provided. Officers were not injured. And then when it comes to the, there were a couple of potential policy violations, no violations around personal rules or regulations. There was a onboarding recording device issue with not being on the outwardmost forward garment, as well as equipment. The PA system had an issue, and no other deficiencies were notated.
Perfect, thank you. Deputy Director Abbasi.
Yes, Chair, members of the board, just a few things I would like to point out for this one. As Member Budanaro stated, that officers did engage in de-escalation efforts, and they were approximately for an hour. During that period, the subject in this case did not comply with the lawful commands from the officers and ultimately fired rounds toward the direction of the officers, who then sought cover behind their marked patrol vehicle and returned fire. After the first round of exchange, the department again initiated de-escalation efforts to secure the subject's safe surrender. Again, those efforts did fail. In addition, as Member Budanaro pointed out, the IFD did examine potential operational and policy-related concerns to include unintentional deactivation of OPRD by one officer. As he stated, issues with the PA system. There was another concern about a delay in the response for drone as well in this case, ammunition loading and count concern, and an approximate 21-minute delay in rendering aid to the subject. The delay, however, of rendering aid was appropriately examined by IAFT based on our review. Because the subject had fired rounds, the scene continued to present safety concerns. The delay should therefore be considered within the circumstances confronting officer and whether it was reasonably safe to approach the subject rather than based solely on the amount of time that passed. IAFT also identified a potential policy violation, as Member Bullian had stated, regarding the OBRD issue. At the time of the incident, the policy required an officer to have OBRD be placed on the outer garment at chest level. In the most recent revision, I believe in December of 2025, they required that it should be above the belt line or above. But this board did present a recommendation to add the language of optimal placement to be at the chest level, which APD did incorporate into policy. That's all I have.
Thank you, sir. Acting Commander Nico, do you have anything to add, sir?
No, thank you. Any questions I can ask?
Board members, questions for CPOA and APD? We have.
Sure.
Of course I have the questions. So one of the question that I had, because it's, looking at this, the individual was obviously suicidal, as stated, and then you guys got the spouse away safely. And I believe we've had, I think, multiple conversations on the side outside of this, that if this individual does not have anyone there, you guys could move back and even just disengage the whole situation.
Right.
Why was that not a thing? Because you could make an argument that because you guys are there, you're amping him up more to then get those firearms and shoot versus disengaging when you know everyone's safe.
Right.
Right. And so that was my biggest question of going, why not?
And in making that determination for whether or not we're going to try to disengage from a situation, it really determines, or the big determining factor in that is, are they a threat to only themselves or others? Once this individual started firing rounds from the residence, now he became a threat to the public as well as himself. So at that point, the determination to disengage is no longer an option for us because we don't know what may happen if we leave, if that makes sense. Additionally, the spouse in this case was also kind of making some references that she might want to stay on scene. And so it was hard for us to determine, with a disengagement, we have to try to make that plan of everything needs to be as safe as possible. Does that make sense?
No. Yeah.
And then again, we were kind of pushed in a direction. Unfortunately, once there were shots that were being fired from inside the residence, outside of the residence, we couldn't disengage at that point. So,
were those shots once you guys started kind of to establish the perimeter or before?
So,
because I think that's a fair question, right?
Absolutely.
You there is inciting him to do more things versus once you could disengage, right? But again, armchair quarterbacking, hindsight 2020, right?
100%. So as far as when the shots were fired, officers were trying to just position themselves. They actually made efforts to not utilize their lights and sirens, not give any PA announcements because of the concern of the individual being armed and wanting to harm himself. While they were doing that, at that point, the individual made the determination to fire rounds from the second story. And that, again, started escalating things. And it wasn't just random. The officers perceived that the shots were being fired at them. So that's a big determining factor as well.
Okay.
Perfect. Any further questions? No. Perfect. Thank you, sir. Do we concur with the findings? Contemplate your life as we talk. As I contemplate your life as we go through this then. So with that being said, the board members, with that being said, I make a motion that the Civilian Police Oversight Advisory Board affirms and upholds the findings of APD's Internal Affairs Force Division investigation for APD case number 25-00581118. May I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Williams.
You can't second.
Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Calderon,
Affirm.
Vice Chair Brunato,
Affirmed.
Member Bolianes,
Affirmed.
Member Duncan?
Affirm.
Member Reichfeld?
Affirm.
Mr. Chairman, that motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Bucko. Great question, by the way. Give me 1 second, guys. Perfect. With that being said, we'll move on to APD case number 25-00686673, presented by Member Duncan. Floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair. On August 19th, 2025, APD received multiple calls regarding a female identified as Mrs. T at the Los Altos Lofts located at 10330 Hotel Avenue Northeast. Earlier calls that morning involved reports concerning Ms. T and suspicious subjects at the property. At approximately 7:53 a.m., another call was received reporting that Ms. T was in the parking lot unclothed and armed with knives. At approximately 8:07, Officer 1 advised dispatch that he would take the call, and Officer 2 advised that he would assist. Officers were subsequently advised that Ms. T had returned to the apartment and that the knives had been taken away from her by unknown individuals. Upon arriving at the property, the officer spoke to the apartment staff regarding the incident. Officer 1 requested a 40-millimeter impact launcher over the radio. Officer 1 then armed himself with a patrol rifle and donned protective gloves, while Officer 2 also armed himself with his patrol rifle. Ms. T was subsequently observed descending a stairwell. Officer 1 addressed Ms. T and stated, "Hi, put that down." As Ms. T contributed to descend the stairwell with her hands raised, Officer 1 observed a knife and repeatedly instructed her to put it down. Ms. T continued approaching the Officer 1 while armed with the knife. The reconstruction conducted as part of the investigation estimated that the distance between Officer 1 and Ms. T at approximately 42 feet. Officer 1 discharged his patrol rifle and Ms. T collapsed forward. The OBRD evidence captured a metallic clinking sound and a black object falling from Ms. T's right hand. The object was subsequently identified in the video evidence as a knife. The use of force was classified as a level 3 firearm discharge and officer-involved shooting. Following the shooting, medical aid was provided to Ms. T. Dispatch records document that a chest seal was applied at approximately 8:48 and CPR was initiated at approximately 8:49 a.m. Rescue and fire personnel responded to the scene. Ms. T sustained a fatal gunshot wound to the chest. No officers were reported injured during the incident. Ms. T was not charged, and the review identified no previous use of force cases involving her. As part of this investigation, the use of deadly force was reviewed under APD policies requiring force to be objectively reasonable, necessary, and limited to the minimum amount of force necessary. It was also considered an APD policy regarding verbal warnings when feasible, the duty to provide medical attention following a reportable use of force, and the requirement that deadly force be based on objectively reasonable belief that an individual presents a threat of death or serious physical injury. The investigation ultimately determined that Officer 1's use of force was objectively reasonable and within APD policy. No deficiencies or concerns were identified related to tactics, training, policy, supervision, or any other areas. An equipment concern was identified regarding the availability of less lethal weapons. IAFD made a referral recommendation that officers who do not have access to a 40-millimeter launcher be issued or obtain a department-approved less lethal beanbag shotgun as a temporary substitute.
Thank you, ma'am. Deputy Director Abbasi?
Yes, Chair and members of the board, a few things about this case. This, as Member Duncan stated, was an officer-involved shooting during a response involving an individual experiencing a mental health crisis and who was armed with a knife. Under APD SOP 2-52, deadly force may be used when an officer has an objectively reasonable belief that an individual poses a threat of death or a serious injury. In this case, the subject was armed with a knife and was running in the direction of the officer when the officer decided to use deadly force. Per Graham v. Connor, the reasonableness of the officer's action must be judged based on the circumstances confronting the officer at the time, not solely in hindsight. The officer reported perceiving the subject to be approximately 21 feet away when he fired. However, the subsequent objective OBRD evidence indicated that the distance was approximately 42 feet away, which is twice the distance that the officer perceived. The officer maintained his position and discharged his rifle when the subject reached the distance at which he reported perceiving an imminent deadly threat. The officer did not reposition toward the open parking area to create additional distance or utilize patrol vehicle as a cover, though IAFD documentation did provide some justification of why those pre-positioning was not done by the officer. The availability and deployment of less lethal options also warrant consideration. The officer requested a 40 millimeter option over radio while he was retrieving the rifle from his patrol vehicle. However, neither of the two responding officers had a 40 millimeter, and both in this incident deployed with rifles. And Member Duncan stated that IAFD rectified that issue, that none of the officers in their unit had 40 millimeter assigned other than their sergeant, so that IAFD documented it and addressed the issue after the fact. There was no apparent communication or coordination between officers related to the deployment of less lethal or lethal options. The IAFD investigation noted the subject approached the officers quickly, giving the officers limited time to develop a devised plan or a force array. The investigation also documented the officers' reluctance to rely on the ECW, or specifically Taser 10 in this case, based on a prior incident that occurred approximately 10 months before this incident. After that incident, the officer went through reality-based training and did not express a lack of confidence in the use of Taser. An officer's prior experience may reasonably influence decision-making. However, the department should continue evaluating whether individual experiences with less lethal tools are affecting officers' willingness to consider those options in subsequent encounters. The IAFD investigation determined the use of deadly force was reasonable, minimal, and necessary, and based on the facts that were surrounding this incident. The basis for characterizing it as minimal is not clearly addressed in the documented analysis done by IAFD. Regarding less lethal options, justification included a lack of trust in Taser 10, no availability of 40 millimeter in rapidly evolving situation that did not allow time to create a force array or retrieve a beanbag shotgun. While these circumstances were considered in determining that the deadly force was reasonable and necessary, the investigative record, based on our observation, did not sufficiently articulate what it meant by minimal or why that particular conclusion was supported. Thank you. Stand for questions.
Thank you, sir. Before Acting Commander Nico talks, is there questions for the CPOA? Because that's a good mouthful. Acting Commander Nico, do you have anything to add?
This was one that was a very in-depth investigation. There was a lot of moving parts with this, especially there was a lot of information that was brought up during the course of the investigation, specific the Taser 10, the lack of confidence in that weapon system really was one of the things that concerned me personally. As most of the board knows, that's one of the things that I did when I was at the academy. And it was subsequently addressed as a potential magazine issue, that all the magazines on the actual tasers were replaced because it was an issue that there was a seating issue regarding the previous use of force that the officer referenced that led to this lack of confidence. I've had numerous conversations with this officer subsequent to this to ensure that he's now getting more and more comfortable with this taser and with his weapon systems. He advised that he is getting more comfortable, which is something that made me feel much better about incidents in the future. I had the same concerns with the 40 millimeter, and I don't know if the academy, if Lieutenant Higdon can advise. I'm no longer at the academy, but this was something that I pushed constantly at the academy, trying to recognize that officers all need to have these 40 millimeter options, and not just like a beanbag. There's a lot of different options that we have, but we at least need to have these tools that we can utilize as less lethal options that would extend our range to encounter individuals at a greater distance. That specifically is the 40 millimeter. So I'm hoping that that's being addressed, because these are all valid concerns that were brought up by the CPOA, and so I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, sir. Board members, any other questions? Before you start, Lieutenant Higdon, on that 40 millimeter comment, can you give us a little bit information on that.
Sorry to throw you under the bus.
Thanks a lot, sir. No, thanks for, I'm glad I stuck around. So we all sit together on the Force Review Board as well. There is concern that, one, there isn't enough 40 millimeters. It's a budget issue where they are pricey, so the city is finding it difficult to purchase more of them. And as Commander Nico was discussing the lack of confidence, that we're looking at a more effective round that hasn't been purchased by the city yet, but it packs a little bit more of a punch than the current one being used at the time. As far as beanbag shotguns go, once the 40s were implemented, they began phasing out the 870 shotguns. The department no longer trains cadets on the use of a shotgun. So having a very young department, we're required to basically put them through a 40-hour training of shotgun manipulation and training. With this same conversation that is with this same exact incident, I spoke with our deputy chief, who was asking, because property has these shotguns that are being turned in, and I guess they send them in for destruction or whatever the city decides to do with them, but trying to get them back out into the field to use as less lethal options. Again, it goes back to the lack of training and the lack of officers being able to manipulate it and pass the qualification that it requires to do based on the movements and the different things that are required to do it through our quals, as I was discussing earlier this evening. A lot of officers have been failing our shotgun quals, and so they're turning in their shotguns in lieu of a 40 millimeter or something, or a taser.
Thank you, sir.
Does
Appreciate
that answer your question?
It provides insight, right? And that's probably the biggest thing, right, too, especially when we find out, like, of course, budgetary issues, trying to figure out another less lethal applicator, right? To the point we want less lethal if we can, and of course, at greater distances if possible. So the perception at 21 feet compared to like the Taser 10 now that has a 41 or 45 foot max range, right? But there's that confidence as well, so that makes sure. So thank you for touching that. Thank you for touching that one. And I know you have questions.
I got a couple questions.
So go ahead with the first one.
Of course I have questions, right? Well, why not? So one of the questions I had, and this kind of stemmed from our use of force meeting last week, is what, just because it was I heard it of the command drop the knife, not a de-escalation drop the knife, or force will be used against you. Granted, it was quick. I just wanted to understand, going back to our previous conversation from the training of use of force, how was that different just because it was a tone of voice? And I just wanted to get that understood.
So if I'm understanding, you're asking how we evaluated the officer's use of drop the knife versus giving a force warning of, say...
Or to de-escalate.
So when looking at de-escalation, again, there's that feasibility factor of what was the officer dealing with at the time. The officer was presented with a threat that rapidly evolved, and it was addressed in the investigation that he felt at the time all he had time to do was to say, drop the knife, drop the knife. He said it, I believe it was 3 times. At this point, de-escalation is no longer feasible. And that's how we look at it through our investigation is, was there an opportunity to de-escalate? Now, force warnings are a form of de-escalation. However, the officer was asked about this, and he's like, I was saying drop the knife. The concern at the time was the weapon. And he felt that it was not feasible to give a full force warning. He just wanted to say drop whatever was scaring him. And based upon our preponderance, that was a reasonable perception by the officer is this knife is scaring the officer. And that's kind of where he was approaching his commands, not force warnings. Does that answer your question?
Oh, no, that does. I guess it was kind of coming back because I mean, as we all know, this one was interesting.
Yes.
One of the other questions I had was around force arrays, because I looked, because they did mention 40, you guys touched on it, cool. But then at the same point, and you guys touched on the individual one of the officers not being comfortable with a Taser 10, and they both deployed with the ARs. And I'm thinking to myself, where's a force array of, hey, I got this, you do this, or could the other person, they both not have comfort with the Taser 10? Because I mean, the effective range was there for a less lethal option.
Right.
And that's where I'm like, that's where I'm stumped.
Yeah.
And I don't like the lack of training. Like, I know it's an answer. But lack of training in somebody's comfort level, and someone passed away because of it. And I don't necessarily love that answer.
Right. And that was the other officer at the time was questioned about that. And in his interview, he actually referenced that he was considering whether or not to grab a Taser versus the rifle. And because of the threat and now getting the additional information that she had rearmed herself with that knife, he made the determination at that point he wanted to arm himself with the rifle. However, while making that determination is when everything else escalated, forcing the primary officer to engage. It was one of those things of, I'm trying to get everything going here, and there was just a lot of moving parts, and unfortunately, before a force array could even be established or even considered, it happened very fast. And so you had the original officer out there had already armed himself with the rifle. The other one is kind of like, what's the appropriate tool for me to get? And literally as he's doing that and he's trying to get his rifle, that's when the shooting happened. It's one of those dynamics that we struggle with, especially only having two officers there. It's one of those, there was a lot of information that was provided to the officers about the deadly threat it was there at one point. Then there was someone had taken the knives away from her. Then she had rearmed herself, and then all of a sudden, that's her. Right. And so she was coming down the stairs very quickly, turned towards the officer, started closing that distance. In a perfect world, yes, we would have that perfect force array where we have a 40 millimeter, we have a Taser, we have someone for communications. Unfortunately, it's not always feasible. And sometimes it's just one of those things that we have to make split-second decisions, and that's what these officers did.
Okay, thank you. Perfect, thank you. Any further questions? No, perfect. Thank you, gentlemen, appreciate you.
Thank you.
With that being said, so I make a motion that the Civilian Police Oversight Advisory, sorry, before I jump on it, do we concur? You guys are good? You agree with it? You agree with findings?
No.
You guys are different, I know.
Yeah.
So I make a motion that the Civilian Police Oversight Advisory Board affirms and upholds the findings of APD's Internal Affairs Force Division investigation for APD case number 25-0068673. May I get a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Calderon,
Affirm.
Vice Chair Budonaro,
Affirmed.
Member Bolianitz.
Reject.
Alrighty. Member Duncan,
Affirm.
Member Reichfeld.
Affirm.
The motion is passed 4-1.
Thank you, Ms. Baca, I appreciate that. With that being said, Member Bolianitz, I know you rejected it, so I need you, for the record, public transparency, I want you to explain why.
Yeah, the reason why I rejected was because I do not believe the force was actually minimal. I think there was, from looking at the OBRD footage and just kind of looking at everything, that there was enough time for the one officer to identify there was time to swap out to a Taser and to at least establish a quick force away from a split-second decision, and then possibly even use the Taser 10 even at the distance of 42 feet, which is within the effective range of the Taser 10.
Perfect, thank you, appreciate that. Any other comment, board members? Cool. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. With that being said, we'll move on to the next order of business, which will be the reports from the CPOB subcommittee. Up first is Policy and Procedure Review Subcommittee by Member Baldonado. Vice Chair, my apologies.
Thank you, Chair. The Policy and Procedure Review Committee, we met on August 6th at 3 p.m. Our next upcoming meeting will be September 3rd at 3 in the CPOA meeting rooms. Chair?
Thank you, Vice Chair. With that being said, we'll move on to the next order of business, which will be the discussion and possible action. First up is Ad Hoc Audit Committee disbandment, presented by myself. So the next agenda item is consideration of disbandment of the Ad Hoc Audit Committee that we completed last month, and we did the report. It's been published already, all that fun stuff. So the committee was established to complete its assigned audit work and related reporting that myself and Member Bolianitz did. No, sorry, Member Duncan. My apologies. As the work has now been completed and the committee has fulfilled its assigned purpose, is there any discussion or comment from the board based on this request? No, cool, perfect. With that being said, hearing no further discussion, I make a motion to formally disband the Ad Hoc Audit Committee. May I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Member Bolians. You gotta be fast. Member Bolians. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Calderon,
Affirm.
Vice Chair Bludonato,
Affirm.
Member Bolianitz,
Affirm.
Member Duncan,
Affirm.
Member Reichfeld.
Affirm.
Mr. Chairman, that motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. With that being said, the Ad Hoc Committee is therefore formally disbanded for this session. Moving on to the next agenda item will be the APD policy presented by Mr. Gabe Reamer, our policy analyst from CPOAB. First up, we're going to do is recommendations. We have up first, which is SOP 1-9 compliance and oversight section. Awesome.
Yes. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So, really quickly, the recommendations changed since the subcommittee. I think I've improved it a little, cut out some of the redundancy. I went back and re-listened to the PPRB, and it kind of enlightened me a little bit more. And it's more of a straightforward recommendation than I explained in our subcommittee meeting. But basically, so in PPRB last month, language was removed from SOP 161 Internal Affairs Force Division regarding the responsibility to perform low-level control audits. The APD policy presenters stated that PMU will be tasked, that's the Performance Metrics Unit, will be tasked with conducting these audits, and that is incorporating a portion of the team currently conducting them. SOP 19, this policy in question, compliance and oversight section, particularly section 194A1, lays out general and some specific responsibilities for PMU, but does not specifically address its responsibility to perform these audits or reviews. So since it is officially being transferred between these units, and the PMU is kind of incorporating this form, what we used to think of as the level 1 team, to perform these, it would be fitting or perhaps beneficial for it to just be incorporated in policy so that it's clear and in there. So the potential recommendation going forward for that one, that I'm putting forward, is for 194A1, is a new section F that says conduct audits of documented low-level control tactics to verify proper classification and reporting. It's pretty straightforward there, and it fits in with the policy and how it's kind of very generally performing their audit duties. And I will go ahead and stop there before I move on to the next section, which is kind of a slightly different discussion, although related.
Thank you, sir. Board members, questions, comment from the two on the committee?
No, but this, the only thing it does for that section is going to be for open discussion. So, and this is reason why for the discussion of PMU is taking away some of the reports because it's no longer use of force. So that's where it's like, nope, let's include it now. So then we have it in the policy.
Perfect, thank you. CPOA, executive director, deputy director? No, okay. Sorry, I'm trying to think in my head of the process. Like, should we vote on it now to submit that section, or should we just do all of one?
I can go through it, and then at the very end, when I'm done with this policy, we can vote on it, as long as because perhaps the change will be made when I talk about shows of force.
Okay, go ahead.
And I'll go through this quickly. I won't read every line to you guys, but also in the same subcommittee meeting, we discussed whether similar policy language would be necessary for shows of force and similar audit function. At SOP 257.6 Field supervisory review of show of force responsibility states that when there is a reported show of force, supervisors shall review the officer's narrative in the UIR to ensure it includes the essential elements and review the relevant OBRD footage. I included 256-4B down there to show you those essential elements. And I bring this forward because it was brought up in the policy subcommittee meeting, and I didn't put this language forward in that meeting to show that they're reviewed a little bit differently. Low-level control is this audit function plays an essential role. In the shows of force, it's much more of a supervisor-led. So, and it's just from that report and watching the OBRD, it's not a percentage of them. Instead, it's a review of the incident once it's reported. So it's slightly different. It wouldn't be a same audit function, and it would be particularly hard to audit shows of force in the same way, because a lot of what low-level control is trying to do is it's trying to see whether it was properly classified, whether it should have been a use of force or a serious use of force, while also seeing if it was a reasonable action. Show of force is a little different. You'd only be really making that determination of whether it was reasonable in that context. So it's a slightly different thing, and that's why we separated them a little bit. Also, just for the record, I think it's just worth stating that unreported shows of force, low-level control tactics, and uses of force may be identified through PMU's monthly review of a random sample of OBRD videos, their unreported use of force audit, or through their supervisor's monthly random review of OBRD. If you flip to the next page, you can see the actual policy language there for your convenience. So that is how I think, if the show of force were to go unreported, so if somebody were to, let's say, point their firearm at someone and then not report it, that is where those would come out in most cases, at least from policy.
Perfect, thank you for that overview and the insight. Board members, do you have any questions? Perfect. Do I make the motion or do I make the motion?
I make a motion that we, actually you can do it because I'm terrible at making motions on these things with policies.
So the potential recommendation is for 1-9-4-8-1, and it states conduct audits of documented low-level control tactics to verify proper classification reporting. So I make a motion that we direct the CPOA to submit this recommendation on behalf of both CPOA and CPOA-B as part of this policy to APD. May I get a second?
I second that, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Calderon,
Affirm, sorry.
Vice Chair Bludonato,
Affirm.
Member Bolianitz,
Affirm.
Member Duncan,
Affirm.
Member Reichfield.
Affirm.
Mr. Chairman, this motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. And now we're moving on to SOP 1-6, which is our patrol ride-along program.
Yes, this was an interesting one for me. I got to do a lot of research into other department policies, but during our policy subcommittee meeting, we discussed adding language to ride-along SOP requiring assigned officers to communicate general safety expectations and instructions to participants. Similar provisions ranging from general guidance to very specific requirements appear in the ride-along policies of other law enforcement agencies. And very varying is, I can't emphasize that enough, many policies, some of them had dozens of things from making sure that the people wear their seatbelts to where they know where the fire extinguisher are, to certain rules about not letting male officers be with male participants, which is, I think, just going a little far. Something must have gone wrong on the West Coast when I read this policy. So I think the best thing to do is to trust the officers, but to have some sort of standard that they're going to set kind of the tone at the beginning of the ride-along, that they are going to keep their participants safe. And one way, from the kind of collaging a lot of the language I found in other policies to two general points, a potential recommendation could be a new section in this policy, the officer ride-along responsibilities. The one would be the assigned officer shall, before and throughout the ride-along as appropriate, communicate applicable safety expectations and instructions to the participant. The officer may terminate the ride-along if the participant does not follow those instructions. The second one is if the assigned officer reasonably believes that the responding to a call for service may place the ride-along participant in danger, the officer shall, when feasible, leave the individual at a safe location before responding. The officer shall notify ECC, personnel of the individual's location, and coordinate to arrange for the individual's pickup as soon as circumstances and available resources permit. So those, I just try to keep them as general as possible, but at least have something in this policy that is outside of kind of the rules to get access to a ride-along, because very little of it actually talks about the ride-along itself. So these this provides something for officers, and it also gives them a little authority and policy to have some control. And I think it's, someone who participates in a ride-alongs, it actually is, it's almost comforting. I think it would be comforting to see this in policy too, that it would be that, hey, if something goes kind of haywire, they're not gonna go on a high-speed chase with me or take me to the bank heist, right? So.
No, I agree. Anything to add?
We all know this policy is near and dear to my heart. Yeah, so no, this is the one, because I think with the ride-alongs, it's very helpful to, since we're doing it a lot, we are a little bit more comfortable, but because it is open to I think, anyone who wants to do one, ish. But just having those officers set the expectations of the safety expectations and the instructions of what to do, what if something happens, to have those levels of expectation, right? Because sometimes you just go in and then you just go and there's never that conversation. So it just helps that foster that communication and just levels of safety expectations for both the officer and the person who's riding along.
I agree. Board members, questions, comments? Perfect. With that being said, I make a motion that we approve the proposed language for SOP 1-6 Patrol Ride Along Program. Potential recommendation of a new section, possibly under 1-65-5 procedures 1-6-5-A- or through D, excuse me. May I get a second, please?
Seconded.
My apologies. Hold on. And that we advise the CPOA to forward these recommendations on our behalf to APD. May I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Baca, sir.
Which one are you approving?
Both? Both. So let me do that all over again. So make a motion that we direct the CPOA to submit this recommendation for SOP 1-6 Patrol Ride Along Program under the policy recommendation, so new section under 1-65, procedures 1-6-5-A-D for both recommendations 1 and 2. May I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Member Boyanitz. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Conmalone.
Affirm.
Vice Chair Budonado.
Affirm.
Member Bolianitz.
Affirmed.
Member Duncan.
Affirmed.
Member Reichfeld.
Affirm.
Mr. Chairman, that motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. I appreciate that. Mr. Reamer, thank you. Appreciate you. I'm gonna go through this one pretty quickly. So next section on the agenda will be no recommendations under APD policies. To ensure clarity and transparency, the following SPs do not have any recommendations to be sent to APD. It's going to be SP 1-15 Air Support, SP 1-24 Burglary Unit, SP 1-53 Homicide Unit, SP 1-61 Internal Affairs Force Division, SOP 2-24 Hazard Materials Incident Response, SP 2-25 Bomb Threat and Bomb Emergencies, SP 2-58 Force Review Board, SOP 2-76 Court, SOP 2-78 Domestic Abuse Investigations, SOP 3-20 Timesheets Overtime Compensatory Time and Work Shift Designation, SOP 3-25 Bid Process, SOP 3-41 Complaints Involving Department Personnel. Again, those SOPs do not have any recommendations from the CPOAB or CPOA and to be sent to APD. Moving on to APD response to policy recommendations. Do we have any today? None. Awesome. Thank you, sir. I had to make you sit down for that, but
No worries.
there's no responses from APD policies. So moving on to next order of business, which will be other business. Mayor Bolianis, you have one thing, correct?
Yes, I do have one thing, and this kind of goes back to the policy recommendations for SOP 1-9 for the PMU. Because shows of force and low-level control tactics are no longer uses of force, I would still like to get those reported on. So I would like to have the board request through the CPOA to get a monthly report like we have been getting for low-level control tactic usage and then shows of force, and then kind of do the trending analysis around that. Because then that way we're continuing to monitor what we have been from the PMU.
CPA.
So in essence, you're asking to continue receiving it. You do receive it now, but because of the change, you're
because
asking.
Because of the change, let's just
to
make sure we're formally asking and requesting.
To continue to get it.
To continue, yep.
CPOA members, anybody dissent against that? We agree with it?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. CPOA. Anything else? Are you good?
Before you depart, please see Deputy Director tonight, so.
How we
that's
will.
all.
No. Okay. So with that being said, and council, you're okay with that? Typically, we don't vote on that. It's just an ask. Okay. Perfect. With that being said, any other business coming before the board? No? Cool. Perfect. With that being said, I'll move to the next order of business, which would be adjournment. The next regularly scheduled board meeting will be held on Thursday, September 10th, 2026 at 5 p.m. here in the chambers. With that being said, I make a motion that we adjourn today's meeting. May I get a second, please? Second?
I second.
Second.
Member Duncan, thank you. Ms. Baca, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Calderon,
Affirm.
Vice Chair Bludenaro,
Affirmed.
Member Bolianitz,
Affirm.
Member Duncan,
Affirm.
Member Reichfeld.
Affirm.
Mr. Chairman, that motion has passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Baca. With that being said, the meeting is adjourned at 20:54 hours. Thank you. Have a great night.